Chapter 1342. Jiang Pingji ran the army strictly, but the salary and pension benefits given to the soldiers were second to none among the feudal lords. She spent half a month dealing with this matter. In her free time, she would bring people out to survey the terrain of Changya to see if there were any areas that could be improved. Not only did she go alone, but she also brought Huang Song along. They are all busy. No matter how I think about it, only you are free. Jiang Pingji said calmly. She looked as if she was just talking about the weather. Huang Song was so angry that he was about to bleed. 20 days ago, he was still an opponent whom he had fought to the death with. Have you forgotten? Was he being scolded for being a freeloader? Jiang Pingji was wearing a loose robe with large sleeves. Her long sleeves were tied up with a bracelet, revealing her bare arms. Now that it was almost late autumn, Huang Song felt cold just by looking at her clothes. He couldn't wait to stay away from her. Jiang Pingji was wearing wide-toothed wooden clogs. Huang Song followed beside her. Behind her stood more than 20 guards with swords. They climbed to the top of a nearby hill, and looking down, they could see a continuous line of regular barracks. Right now, Changya is a desolate place. However, I heard that it used to be a county with abundant grain production. Jiang Pingji took a glance and ignored the guards' fearful gazes. She climbed onto the rock at the top of the mountain and stood higher to see further. Does Bogeo know about this? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw her suicidal actions. He immediately backed away to clear his name. He didn't want to be misunderstood as trying to murder Jiang Pingji. He reckoned that they would pounce on him and kill him before he could do it. I've heard a little about it. It said that the rainwater flowed backwards and caused the plague, Jiang Pingji said. The terrain here is low. If there is a rare rainstorm and the waterway is blocked, it will be easy for the river to flow backwards. The natural disasters in Dongqing were endless. Droughts and floods died. No one could guarantee that Changya would not experience a rare rainstorm again. If this place was to be developed, this problem had to be solved. If Changya could be managed well, it would become a major grain-producing county in the future. There was no such thing as too much grain. In this era, it was a blessing for farmers to suffer from cheap grain prices. The scariest thing was that there was not enough grain to eat. Huang Song glanced at her and asked, "What does Lanting plan to do?" Jiang Pingji said, "Divert the river water to nourish the fertility." Because the ancient tools were very backward, in order to make up for this, they had to send a lot of manpower and labor. According to the previous methods, Jiang Pingji recruited refugees from the vicinity and provided relief through work. Not only could it solve the security problems of the area, but it could also solve the livelihood problems of the people. At the same time, it would not delay the construction of various projects. Naturally, he would do the same to Changyi. However, Changya was a desolate and uninhabited place. Not to mention refugees, it was hard to even see a living person. If she wanted to develop the area, Jiang Pingji would have to transfer manpower from other places. This would be another expense, and it would take time to transfer people. I'm planning to sort out the uniforms. They were prisoners of war, but weren't they Huang Song's former troops? Jiang Pingji planned to absorb the young and strong prisoners of war to expand the military camp. The rest would be left behind as labor. Of course, even if they were prisoners of war, Jiang Pingji planned to pay them, but the pay was only half that of normal labor. Once the construction was over, these captives could either stay and become residents of Changya, or they could choose to return home. Huang Song said, "Lanting can make the decision." In his opinion, Jiang Pingji's methods were gentle and merciful. If it was in the past, when food was scarce, the prisoners of war would be killed. Prisoners of war could not be considered human beings. Their social status was lower than that of slaves. If Jiang Pingji disliked their gluttony, she could kill them here to save money. Not only would they be kept alive, but they would also be paid to work. They would even have the opportunity to regain their status as civilians in the future. Even Huang Song could not find fault with it. Jiang Pingji stayed on the mountain and watched the scenery for a while. Then, she got up and jumped off the huge rock. Let's go back. It's getting dark. Everyone went down the mountain and returned. Just as they were halfway up the mountain, Huang Song accidentally stepped on something and almost rolled down. Jiang Pingji quickly pulled him up. Huang Song was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. Why did you step on nothing? There's something under my feet. Huang Song stepped aside and found a piece of blackened bone exposed where he had stepped on. Jiang Pingji did not care at first. When she looked down, she found a piece of green on the ground near the black bone. She got up and said to the guard, "Dig it out." The guard dug very deep. It took him a quarter of an hour to dig the headless corpse out of the mud. There was a seal next to the corpse. Jiang Pingji did not care about the corpse. She cared about the seal. Huang Song glanced at it and said, "This seal is of excellent quality. Looking at the carving and style, it seems to be from the early Xia dynasty." The Xia dynasty unified the Central Plains. The surrounding small countries succumbed to it. It was an era with an extremely prosperous economy and a luxurious atmosphere. This atmosphere also affected all walks of life. Many places carried the decadent atmosphere unique to that era. Even the seal that was commonly used by Taoists was more or less affected. Jiang Pingji said, "The early Xia dynasty. Taoism was popular at that time. This seal came from the same source as the one that Wei Ci carried. Except for the different seal characters, it seemed to be cloned." Huang Song said, "Although it's not the state religion, it's much more likable than Buddhist monks." Buddhism was an imported religion. It was not a local religion. When monks were at their most domineering, they almost shook the foundation of the entire society. When Buddhism was first introduced, it was not acclimatized. After it gained a firm foothold, it was unstoppable. In order to avoid taxes and avoid military service, the people shaved their heads and became monks. Even though they became monks, their behavior was no different from that of ordinary people. In order to build temples, they occupied millions of hectares of fertile land. Most importantly, they did not pay taxes. They kept a large number of monk soldiers and used countless copper, iron, gold, and silver to build Buddha bodies. This seriously affected society. The period of the 16 Kingdoms was also the most prosperous and darkest period of Buddhism. After the establishment of the Xia dynasty, the founder of the Xia dynasty, under Prime Minister Huangfu's suggestion, exterminated Buddhism. He destroyed countless temples, confiscated millions of hectares of fertile land that was illegally occupied by the temples, confiscated hundreds of thousands of slaves, and ordered the illegal monks and nuns to return to secular life. In addition, he dismantled the bronze and golden Buddha statues. The materials were used to cast coins, farm tools, and weapons. He established strict rules to become a monk. After this battle, Buddhism declined, and Taoism rose rapidly with the support of the court. Of course, there were people among the people who said that Prime Minister Huangfu was a disciple of a Taoist temple in name when he was young, so he was especially close to Taoism. After Huang Song's explanation, not only did Jiang Pingji understand, but salted fish in the streaming room also understood. Tudu Feicho. It sounds like the three martial arts sect destroyed Buddhism. The Fairy Queen's crimson. I thought monks were kind and benevolent. I'm dumbfounded. Yi Zimu. The monks in the history of China were similar. Chapter 1343. The headless skeleton was poisoned to death. Huang Song sighed. Sigh, this brother is quite pitiful. Although it was unknown how many years had passed, one could still see the dark color on the bones. Even though he didn't know who the owner of the skeleton was, it was still quite a tragic ending. Jiang Pingji glanced at the skeleton. This skeleton is quite old. In short, it was not a corpse from this era. Looking at the seal on his hand, the owner of the corpse was probably from the Great Xia dynasty. Should we dig a hole and bury it? He died such a pitiful death. If even his corpse was abandoned in the wild, it would be too tragic. Jiang Pingji nodded. The guards dug a hole and buried the bones in the ground. Huang Song looked at Jiang Pingji in astonishment and asked hesitantly, "This seal, how should we deal with it?" It was best not to touch a dead person's belongings. Who knew what kind of dirty things were on them? Jiang Pingji said, "Xi Xiao has a similar seal with him. I'll let him take a look." "Oh," Huang Song replied and did not continue to ask. The quality of the insight seal was very valuable. It would be a waste if he didn't take it. In any case, the owner wouldn't be able to settle the score with a living person. This could be considered a windfall. When they returned to the campsite, the sky was almost dark. Jiang Pingji turned off the streaming room and invited Huang Song to join her for dinner. Huang Song sighed. "Losing to Lanting makes me even more convinced." Jiang Pingji said, "Eating won't stop you from talking." Huang Song shook his head. He used to hear that Jiang Pingji's meals were the same as the soldiers'. At that time, he thought it was impossible, but now he knew it was true. It was because of this that he felt so emotional. Most of Dongqing's land belonged to the north, and wheat cultivation flourished there. However, before the Great Xia dynasty, people didn't know that this thing could be ground into flour. Most of the time, it was steamed and eaten, and it was called wheat rice. Later, people discovered that wheat could be ground into flour and made into all kinds of pastries. Not only was he full, but the taste was also much better than the wheat rice from before. Even so, the agricultural technology was still immature. The cost of removing the bran from the wheat was too high, and the price rose accordingly. Ordinary people could not afford it at all. The processing of the wheat or other food that the common people ate was very rough. It was often mixed with gravel and small stones. To judge whether a person was born rich or poor, one could usually tell by looking at his teeth. Their teeth were neat and clean, which meant that they ate well and could even wash their teeth and rinse their mouths. Their living conditions were naturally rich. Their teeth were worn and uneven. Most of them came from poor families. The food they ate was not carefully processed, so there was more sand and stones. The soldiers' rations had been millet porridge or wheat rice before the 16 kingdoms, but now they were made from flour ground from wheat and made into pastries and rice porridge. The sesame seed biscuit and steamed bun placed in front of him looked very exquisite. There was no trace of sand or stones, and it was also fragrant, soft, and delicious. As the lord, it was normal for Jiang Pingji to eat more meticulously, but Huang Song saw that the ordinary soldiers ate the same way. What did this mean? This meant that the economy under Jiang Pingji's rule was very prosperous, agricultural tools were developed, and ordinary soldiers could also eat delicately. By seeing one spot, one can see the whole leopard. Huang Song was naturally convinced of his defeat. Unbeknownst to them, Jiang Pingji's improvement and invention of agricultural equipment were almost equivalent to that of war equipment. Every year, she allocated a large amount of funds. Xiao Guang and Zhang Ping of the woodworking workshop received such a generous salary. If they did not give her something good, she would beat the two of them to death. If Jiang Pingji made a trip back now, she would find that the agricultural equipment in Wanzhou had been improved again. Bai Yuexia had been taught by the Mahishts, and she was extremely talented. When the three technological experts gathered together, it was like lightning striking the ground fire. Inspiration burst forth wave after wave. After dinner, Huang Song took the initiative to leave. Jiang Pingji lit an oil lamp and read the documents for 6 hours. When she put down the last scroll, she heard Wei Si's footsteps. As expected, Wei Si sent her supper again. If it were not for the fact that she could not gain weight from eating, she would have become a pig sooner or later. Zixiao, look at this. Jiang Pingji took out the seal that she had picked up earlier and handed it to Wei Si. She took the bowl and chopsticks that Wei Si handed to her. This is... Wei Si's eyes widened in shock. He subconsciously raised his hand to touch his waist. The Dharmachakra seal that perfected Liuru had asked Master Liaochen to give him was still there. How could the Lord have a similar one? My lord, where did this Dharmachakra seal come from? Jiang Pingji explained the details in detail. When he heard that the seal had been picked up near an unknown headless corpse, Wei Si understood everything. He said solemnly, I'm afraid that corpse has a great background. Jiang Pingji asked, what background? I'm afraid it's the remains of Prime Minister Huangfu of the previous dynasty. Wei Si said hesitantly, I also have one here. This was given to me by Jinren Liuru through Master Liaochen. According to Jinren Liuru, the seal used to belong to a Taoist layman disciple. That disciple was Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty. There was a pair of seals. One was passed down to Jinren Liuru, and the other should have been buried with him. The seal was one of the tools that Taoists often used in religious ceremonies and ceremonies. It was a tool to make a living and was used to invite the gods. Jinren Liuru had given Wei Si one to suppress evil spirits. Now that another had appeared, he was getting more and more confused. Jiang Pingji said, why did that Jinren give you this thing? He could feel that the thing had a sense of righteousness. Because it was harmless, Jiang Pingji allowed Wei Si to keep it close to him. Wei Si shook his head. I don't know. Jiang Pingji said, if that's the case, you can take this seal too. She forced the seal into Wei Si's hands. Wei Si did not know whether to accept it or reject it. In the end, he could only accept it. After all, the seal was a burial object of the deceased. Wei Si would not keep it close to him. He would keep it and put it on a memorial tablet to worship. Looking at Wei Si's back as he left, Jiang Pingji's eyes looked dark and deep under the candlelight. The next day, Jiang Pingji received a battle report from Feng Jin. The messenger rushed over on a fast horse. He panted and said, My lord, we have won a great victory in Haozhou. Jiang Pingji opened the battle report with a calm expression. Huang Song's army had been captured. Haozhou's defense was very weak. Feng Jin had gathered 100,000 troops and pointed them at Haozhou. It was only a matter of time before they conquered it. Not only did she not feel happy, but she felt that Feng Jin's efficiency was a little slow. He was 3 to 5 days later than she expected. She was a little happy when she read the battle report. If Bogeo appointed his wife as a general, it might be a different situation. Although she is a woman in the inner residence, her courage and insight are no less than that of an ordinary husband. It turned out that when Feng Jin led his troops and was about to conquer the entire territory of Haozhou, Wang Song's wife, Qi Chaolan, led the troops she raised, the remaining soldiers, and the people to defend the last city. Faced with the great disparity in military strength, Qi Chaolan also knew that it was inevitable that the city would be breached. Therefore, she let a group of martyrs commit suicide on the city wall to express their determination to die in glory rather than live in dishonor. Seeing this, Feng Jin stopped fighting for a few days and changed to besieging the city. Although the martyrs' suicide inspired the fighting spirit of the people in the city, Feng Jin besieged the city but did not attack. There was a serious shortage of food in the city. Feng Jin even ordered the soldiers to sing the names of dishes at the foot of the city every day to use food to sway the will of the guards. The two sides were in a stalemate for a few days. The people in the city could not bear the hunger. They gathered together and launched a riot. They forcibly broke through the city gate. Feng Jin led his troops and marched straight in, conquering the last territory of Haozhou. Qi Chaolan was captured. Chapter 1344. Long before Haozhou was conquered, the news of Huang Song's capture had spread. The news was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for Qi Chaolan. Even though she was mentally prepared, she was still overwhelmed with grief. Her first reaction was not to follow Huang Song. Instead, she chose to take her child back to her parents' home and beg her parents and brothers to take care of her. In the end, her father, who loved her dearly, refused to see her. Her mother looked at her, wanting to say something but hesitating. Her brothers sighed and sent her off. Her mother said to her, "Your father said, the situation in Dongqing has been settled. Lu, she probably won't make things difficult for you and your child because of our past friendship." Qi Chaolan's eyes were dry. She said in an almost helpless tone, "If Bogeo dies, Lu, she won't make things difficult for you and your child, but their future is worrying. If father and mother are willing to take them in and raise them to become useful people, Bogeo's branch can also rise. If anything happened to Huang Song, as a woman in the inner house, she couldn't give her child the most comprehensive education. There would always be a male elder to supervise and guide them. She was also considered to be from a large family. The education within the family was comprehensive, so she wanted to entrust her child to someone outside the family for a few years. The reason why the gentry could maintain their pride for hundreds of years was because they controlled the educational privileges that ordinary people couldn't enjoy. Qi Chaolan didn't want her children to delay their enlightenment after Huang Song died. If they didn't become useful people, after 1 or 2 generations, Huang Song's branch would be completely destroyed. In addition, she was also worried that the chaos outside would hurt her child, so she wanted to hide in her parents' home. Unexpectedly, her mother looked conflicted and told her a cruel truth. "Daughter, you also know Lu Shi's attitude towards the gentry. In the past, our family had close contact with Bogeo. It's hard to guarantee that Lu Shi won't target our family because of this. It's not that your father doesn't love you, but he has to consider the family's future, so he can't take in Bogeo's child." No one knew what Jiang Pingji's attitude towards Huang Song was. According to the idea of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, Huang Song's children might not have a good ending. Even if they could survive, they would be overrated to death. The structure of the chaotic world was chaotic. Some people fought hard, some watched from the sidelines, and some carefully found a balance between the two. The Qi family that Qi Chaolan belonged to was a typical example. They wanted to enjoy the benefits that came with prosperity, but at the same time, they did not want to bear the corresponding risks. Back then, Qi Chaolan's father had taken a liking to Huang Song at first glance, feeling that this young man had a bright future. Coincidentally, Qi Chaolan had also taken a liking to Huang Song, so her open-minded father acted as a matchmaker for the two of them. In the next few years, Huang Song did not disappoint his father-in-law. He provided him with many conveniences both openly and secretly. Unexpectedly, his father even refused his own grandson and granddaughter at the door. "Chaolan," Qi said. "Bogeo's Chaolan and Qi Chaolan is Qi." Qi Chaolan was already exhausted and could no longer hold on. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "I'm only pleading with my parents to temporarily take them in. If Lu Shi really wants to vent his anger on me, I'll definitely bring the children back. I won't implicate my parents or my family." Even so, it still doesn't work. Although Qi Chaolan was the most pampered daughter in the family, her father was cold-hearted. A daughter that was married out was like water that was poured out. Chi Chaolan's father would not object if it was just to take in Chi Chaolan, but he would not agree to take in Huang Song's child. She didn't want to bring trouble to the family. Chi Chaolan's mother always listened to her husband. She was heartbroken by her daughter's complaints, but what could she do? Lon, go back first. I'll try to persuade your father. This was just an excuse. After hearing this, Chi Chaolan completely gave up. She brought the 3 children back to the house in an ox cart. Children are very sensitive. The eldest and second son are only 1 year apart, but they have been in education for 3 years. They look more mature than normal children. Mother, are we not going to see grandfather? Every time the children came with their mother, they would see their kind grandfather and grandmother. But now, they only saw their grandmother. Chi Chaolan said gently, grandfather isn't feeling well. He doesn't want to pass his illness to you. You'll see him in the future. The 3 children were playing with the maids in the room when she talked to her mother, so they didn't know what happened. The second son said, Mother, the doctor in the house is very skilled. Why don't we let him take a look at grandfather? The 3 girls were only 3 years old. They were quiet and cute. They looked at their mother and 2 brothers with their black pearl-like eyes. She asked in a childish voice, Is grandfather sick? Chi Chaolan's tears, which had just stopped, threatened to burst again. If they didn't have children, she would want to live and die with Huang Song. But with children, she didn't dare to do so. Losing their father meant losing their protection. If they lost their mother, they could only live under someone else's roof and suffer. Chi Chaolan pulled herself together and let the 3,000 troops that she kept join the defense. She wasn't good at the art of war, but she was better than ordinary people. Unfortunately, the situation was hopeless. Her struggles were futile. Jiang Pingji passed the battle report to Huang Song. Huang Song was so anxious that he couldn't even speak properly. He bit his tongue several times. How's the wife? Jiang Pingji said, Huaiyu is a careful and reliable person. He won't hurt your wife and children. They're very safe. Huang Song was still worried. As a man, he held the battle report with reddened eyes. He looked very sad and aggrieved. Jiang Pingji didn't react, but the audience in the streaming room couldn't take it anymore. Midnight eating yellow peach, sob, sob, sob. I suddenly like Huang Song. Eat full. It seems that Huang Song and his wife have a good relationship. It's rare for an ancient man to be like that. Have strength to lose weight. I think that Huang Song's wife played a great role in pledging allegiance instead of committing suicide. Jiang Pingji comforted him. Since you're so worried, I'll arrange for you to go to Wanzhou as soon as possible. Your wife will be sent there too. Huang Song asked, What about you? Jiang Pingji said, There are too many things to do in Hu County, Haozhou, and Qinzhou. I might not be able to go back before the new year. If the people who worked overtime heard this, they would probably be celebrating. They could finally have a good new year. Of course, Han Yu and the others wouldn't be happy if they heard this. Jiang Pingji had come up with a plan on how to govern Changye. It was up to Han Yu and the others to put it into action. My lord, the accounts are ready. Han Yu handed a thick booklet to Jiang Pingji. To govern Changye, not only did they need people, but they also needed to make a good budget. For example, how much food could the laborers eat in a day, how much they would be subsidized in a month, how much they would be subsidized in a month, and how much they would be subsidized in clothes and fabrics. After all, it was almost winter. They couldn't just let them work in rags. Apart from these, Han Yu also calculated the daily work progress of so many people and finally calculated the expenses needed for the whole governance process. The more detailed the accounts were, the more they could use every cent in the right way to prevent shoddy work, corruption, and favoritism. Chapter 1345. The war outside was in full swing, but the people in the rear were generally not affected much. In order to increase employment opportunities and reduce the damage caused by the unemployed in the country to public security, Jiang Pingji spent money to build more than a dozen official roads after careful study. Workers were provided with 2 free meals a day, and a certain amount of copper money was given according to the amount of work they did. A bolt of linen would be subsidized for 4 seasons of the year. If the workers could complete the construction of the entire road ahead of time, the participating workers could receive an additional 10 days of rewards. Not only could these official roads facilitate the deployment of troops during wartime, but they could also benefit the people in peacetime. For example, the people could transport their excess fruits and vegetables to other places to sell, increasing their additional income. In the past, it would take 10 days to half a month just to walk the mountain roads. By the time the farmers arrived at their destination with their fruits and vegetables, the goods would have long rotted away. Now, it only took 1 day to arrive, and the fruits and vegetables were fresh. Jiang Pingji also encouraged women to work outside to support their families. In addition to physical labor such as building roads, she would also provide other jobs that were more suitable for women. Improving the status of women in society was not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. It would take a long time to reverse the stereotype. For example, she knew that some women were paid more for embroidery and weaving at home than their husbands who worked outside. However, the income of these women could only be described as supporting the family, rather than supporting the family. Not only did others not feel that there was anything wrong with it, but even the women themselves felt that they were not the ones who supported the family. It had become the norm to take the initiative to put oneself in a weak position. However, with Jiang Pingji's strong rise, this natural atmosphere was being reversed. It was a good phenomenon after all. There were occasional disturbances along the way, but everything was moving in the direction she had expected. When the convoy escorting Huang Song and the others passed through the border of Wanzhou, everyone felt that the murderous atmosphere in the air gradually faded. It was replaced by a calm and peaceful atmosphere. Huang Song's anxious heart also slowly calmed down, and he began to carefully observe the scenery along the way. Huang Song was sitting in the carriage, reading with his head lowered. He heard the sound of an old ox, and a strange smell drifted in. He frowned slightly and lifted the curtain to look outside. He saw a couple following an old ox, one on the left and the other on the right. On the back of the old ox sat a girl in blue and white clothes. She carried a slanted bag on her shoulder. Huang Song thought they were parents and daughter, but when he listened carefully, he realized he was wrong. This man was a hunter from a village in Wanzhou. His childhood friend had been conscripted into the army and died on the battlefield 2 years ago. His childhood friend's wife became a widow. A widow with a little daughter who was less than 4 years old in the village was not easy to live. The man often helped her. After a while, the two of them fell in love with each other, and then they became husband and wife under Iceman's persuasion. The man also treated his childhood friend's daughter as his own flesh and blood. A while ago, he received news that his childhood friend's orphan had been selected to study at the Golden Scale Academy. The man was so happy that he couldn't sleep for a few days. As a matter of fact, the couple was preparing to send their daughter to the academy. Although she was a girl, those who had the opportunity to study in this era were all talented people. No matter how bad it was still better than selling physical labor. Everyone said that he was blessed. He raised this adopted daughter with all his heart, so he didn't have to worry that she wouldn't take care of him when he was old. He felt that it made sense. When he had his own children in the future, his children could also use his sister's book to learn a few words. Outsiders did not have such benefits. Huang Song had also heard of the Golden Scale Academy, but he hadn't paid much attention to it in recent years. He only knew that it was a private school for initiation. Now that he saw it, he felt that he was wrong. Huang Song lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked the man with a smile, "Big brother, are you going to the market?" When the man heard someone calling him, he turned his head and looked for a long time. Seeing that Huang Song's convoy was heavily guarded, he was so scared that his face turned pale. He said with trepidation, "No, we're sending our child to school." Huang Song asked them to come closer and talk. The couple were both ordinary people, so how would they dare to disobey? Sending your child to school? Huang Song glanced at the girl riding on the cow's back. She was nervously clasping the bag of her sling bag, her bright black eyes wide open. She wasn't considered cute, but she had the unique vigor of a child. It's not easy to go to school these days. It's expensive. The man tried to relax, and the guards guarding the carriage automatically made some space for the man to come closer. Our prefecture overseer is raising her, so it doesn't cost much. The man shook his head and said, "Sending her to school is also good to eat." The official in charge of selecting the children said that the children's meals, drinks, and accommodations were all free in the academy. They would even make clothes for free throughout the year. Huang Song pretended to be surprised and said, "Is there really such a good thing in the world?" The man said, "Of course there is. The girl from the family at the entrance of our village has already been in school for 3 years. Huang Song asked a few more questions in detail, and the man answered enthusiastically. Some of his answers were clear, while others were vague. After all, he was an illiterate hunter from the countryside. It was good enough that he could express what he knew in a simple manner. Huang Song changed the topic and asked a question that caught the man off guard. Based on what Big Brother has said, could it be that someone is heartless and deliberately let their own child take the place of going to school? It wasn't impossible for such a thing to happen. Some parents would very likely take the place of their relatives' orphans for the sake of their own children. The man was stunned and said angrily, "Which heartless person would dare to do that?" Huang Song smiled and said, "Everything is possible." Regarding this problem, does the prefecture overseer have any preventive measures? Since it was a pension, these benefits should really be implemented on the orphans of the martyrs. Otherwise, it would be very ugly if it was exposed. The man hurriedly waved his hands and said, "This won't happen. Who would dare to do this? Aren't they afraid of being haunted by ghosts?" Huang Song had doubts in his heart, but it was a pity that the man in front of him didn't know much and couldn't dispel his doubts. He didn't know that Jiang Pingji had never seen a person's heart as beautiful. When she first formulated these pension benefits, she had already considered all the aspects that could be considered. The military camp would send people to visit each family regularly. If the family that adopted the orphans showed signs of mistreating the children, not only would the family be severely punished, but the abused children would also be sent to a special place to be raised. Every child was recorded so that it would be convenient for the Golden Scale Academy to select children of suitable age. Outsiders couldn't fake it even if they wanted to. Despite the huge amount of work involved, Jiang Pingji felt that these things were necessary. At noon, the sun rose high in the sky. The group finally arrived in Xiangyang district. As soon as they entered the city, the couple led the old cow to ask for directions. When the people saw the children on the cow's back wearing clothes, they immediately gave them directions enthusiastically. The chief who was in charge of escorting them said, "Are you going home directly?" There were only 3 people escorting them this time. One was Huang Song, the other was Qing Jing, and the last was Feng Ju. They happened to be packed and transported to Wanzhou. Chapter 1346. Jiang Pingji simply waved her hand and let them return to their respective homes and find their mothers. Whichever family trained such a troublemaker would be punished. This was the safest method without offending anyone. Therefore, Huang Song returned home to reunite with his wife and daughter. Feng Ju was sent to Feng Ren's residence, and Qing Jing temporarily stayed at his master's residence. Huang Song raised his eyebrows in surprise. What return home? The head of the count said, I just received news that your wife has settled down in the city with a few Langjun and maidens. Huang Song's heart finally relaxed when he heard this. He couldn't help but reveal a relieved smile. Okay, I'll go back now. When Huang Song arrived in Xiangyang district, Qi Chaolan had already stayed there with her children for 7 or 8 days. When she knew that her husband was not dead and would arrive to meet her in a few days, she almost burst into tears. Qi Chaolan waited for her husband to return happily since he was out of danger. But, when Huang Song arrived at his new home and the old housekeeper let him in, he found that his wife and children were not at home. Where did they go, madam? The old housekeeper said, Madam was worried about the 2 young Langjuan studies, so she used her connections to look for a teacher. Who knew that she couldn't find a decent teacher in such a big Xiangyang district? Later, she found out that Master Yuanjing and the other scholars were teaching at the Golden Scale Academy, so she brought Lang Jun and his wife to participate in the entrance examination. Huang Song came in not long after Qi Chaolan left. The couple missed their long-awaited reunion. Huang Song said with difficulty, Send them to the entrance examination. The old housekeeper said, the Golden Scale Academy announced last year that they wanted to expand the number of students. In addition to the original fixed quota, they added an additional 50 places. As long as they are of the right age, they have the opportunity to enroll. To be fair, these students have to go through the examination. The original students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. Every year, 200 students were enrolled. This year, the conditions were relaxed and there were an additional 50 places. For these 50 places, a group of children competed fiercely, as if they were going to be evaluated. Huang Song frowned and said, Lanting is really muddle-headed. How can you set this precedent at this time? Except for a few second generations, Fingyi and others, the students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. If there were other children with strong backgrounds or resources, wouldn't the gap between the students be widened? It was completely conceivable that the gap between the students would widen, and the atmosphere in the academy would definitely not be as good as before. Little did they know that Jiang Pingji, the fox, would never make a losing deal. She was willing to set the precedent because she wanted to bait them. If Huang Song knew the background of the students who were admitted, he would more or less understand Jiang Pingji's thoughts. Of the 50 spots, only 20 were obtained through their own abilities. The other 30 were mostly from wealthy merchant families and were so poor that they only had money left. Among the scholars, farmers, merchants, the social status of merchants was the lowest. Even if they brought a lot of money to invite a teacher, the teacher they invited would only be an ordinary scholar. The truly famous scholars would not even bother to deal with merchants. Not to mention inviting them with money, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter their door. Jiang Pingji operated in the dark. She had her own plans. In the words of the Livestream viewers, it was to attract investment. Give those tycoons a little benefit, then reveal their true colors, and let them willingly fork out money to invest in the Golden Scale Academy's branch. How could they make a nouveau riche pay? Give them what they wanted the most. The merchants were rich, but they had no power, no influence, and no reputation. However, as long as Jiang Pingji spread the news and told them that the merchants who invested in the branch could hang the title of the honorary dean in the academy after the branch was completed, the officials would even come forward to commend them and give them a plaque. There were many people who were willing to fork out money. Of course, Jiang Pingji had also considered Huang Song's concerns. The recruitment this time was done in the name of celebrating the great victory. Next year, they would resume the previous recruitment routine. Huang Song asked the housekeeper, "Where is the Golden Scale Academy?" The housekeeper immediately prepared a carriage for Huang Song to travel, but it was blocked halfway. Seeing this situation, the housekeeper said embarrassedly, "Many merchants heard the news and stayed in the inn near the Golden Scale Academy. Therefore, there are especially many people nearby. Master, why don't you wait a little longer? The patrolling soldiers will clear the way for the carriages and horses." Because of the enrollment expansion, the roads near the Golden Scale Academy were often blocked by traffic. Huang Song waited for a while, then he got off the carriage and walked. The old housekeeper handed the carriage to the coachman and followed Huang Song step by step. Sutra he had to follow him, Huang Song did not know the way. Why are there so many people? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw the crowd outside the Golden Scale Academy. Almost every student who came to take the exam brought a group of parents with them. There were also many maids and manservants who served them. They blocked the 7 feet wide road in front of the Golden Scale Academy tightly. His heart ached when he thought of his wife bringing along 3 children and maids to endure the hardship. In fact, Huang Song imagined too much. As his wife, Chi Chaolan had a special status. She wanted to send her children here for the exam, so there would definitely be a green passage. To prevent the examinees from affecting the studies of the students in the academy, each examinee could only be accompanied by one parent. No manservants or maids were allowed to enter. Huang Song waited for a long time. Finally, it was his turn. The guard looked at him and asked, "Where's your child?" Huang Song said, "My wife has already entered with her child." The guard could only repeat the rules of accompanying the examinee. Examinees can only be accompanied by one parent. Please wait for news at the inn outside. Huang Song widened his eyes in shock. He was stopped outside by a guard. "No, no." Before Huang Song could finish his words, the guard said, "Next." The parent behind him said, "You're dressed quite extravagantly. Why don't you know the rules? Move aside. Don't block the way and waste time. My child missed the exam and can't enter the academy. What about your compensation?" Huang Song was speechless. 2 months ago, if you dared to talk to him like this, your head would definitely be smashed. Huang Song was squeezed out of the crowd with a gloomy expression. His clothes were messed up, and the old housekeeper was also dragged into it. "Master, there are too many people. Why don't we go back and wait for Madam?" Huang Song sighed. "That's fine." When he was about to return home, he saw a familiar figure standing at the door from afar. The other party was holding a lamp and looking out. "Madam." Chi Chaolan brought her child home. Hearing that her husband was back, she almost cried tears of joy. She originally asked the maids to wait for news at the door, but she couldn't sit still and simply waited outside. Hearing a familiar voice, she turned her head to look in the direction of the voice. "Bogeo." Before she could say 1,000 words, she was already in the other party's familiar embrace. After a long time, Chi Chaolan blushed and said, "This is the main street. I don't want to be a joke." Chapter 1347. As soon as the couple entered the house, Chi Chaolan couldn't wait to ask him if he was hurt anywhere and if he had been neglected. Huang Song smiled as he listened to her nagging. He didn't feel annoyed, but he felt especially happy. "Lon, don't worry. Everything is fine. Lanting has specially instructed me that no one will make things difficult for you." Huang Song waited for her to finish speaking before he gently caressed her hand. He knew that his wife had lost weight from the touch of her skin. She used to be plump and well-proportioned, but now she was thinner. He sighed softly and said, "I blame myself very much. I have to make you suffer with me in the future. I don't know what kind of situation we'll face, Chi Chaolan said angrily. I married you because I like you. In your eyes, am I the kind of person who can share joys but not sorrows? For her, the man in front of her had risked his life to come to her. This was already God's blessing. Of course, that's not what I meant. Huang Song sighed and said, it's just that, there are many despicable people in the world who add insult to injury. I don't think I've deliberately offended anyone, but it's easy to deal with a gentleman, but it's hard to guard against a despicable person. Who knows if someone will take advantage of the situation to step on you? You've always been proud. How can you bear such humiliation? I'm not worried about the present, but the future. Huang Song was used to being looked down upon by others in his early years. After becoming a major force in Dongqing, he still had Jiang Pingji above him, who constantly made him feel pressured. There were hidden dangers internally and strong enemies externally. Huang Song didn't have much time to enjoy the happiness of being in a high position. The current situation was at most returning to the starting point for him, but it was different for Chi Chaolan. For example, he was stopped by the guards at the Golden Scale Academy just now. Before he could explain himself, he was squeezed out by the crowd. In the past, when he was in power, which guard would dare to do such a daring thing? For things like power and status, one yearned to have it when one didn't have it. When one finally had it and enjoyed the convenience and superior experience that it brought, one suddenly lost it. The strong psychological gap could not be explained clearly in a few words. Huang Song's thoughts diluted the joy of reunion. His eyebrows were tinged with worry. Chi Chaolan was also affected by this, and her mood became slightly gloomy. She took the initiative to hold Huang Song's hand tightly and said in a low voice, as long as you don't fall, this concubine is naturally not afraid. Huang Song lowered his eyelids and nodded slightly. The couple hugged for a while in the room. Chi Chaolan asked him, I heard that Lu Shi isn't a good person. Why did he let you off so easily? Huang Song briefly told Chi Chaolan about his pledge of blood with Jiang Peng. Chi Chaolan's eyes reddened as she listened. She knew what Huang Song had lost because of this. With his personality, he would rather commit suicide than lose these things. Chi Chaolan could guess why he was so willing to accept the restrictions of the alliance. Don't think too much about it. It's better this way. Huang Song knew what she was thinking. He gently patted her forehead and said with a smile, Lanting is not as heartless as you think. Regardless of whether it was because of their friendship or because of her own calculations, she still left him a way out. Chi Chaolan looked at him in confusion. Husband, what do you mean? Even if it was an aristocratic family with many years of accumulation, if 3 consecutive generations did not enter officialdom, even if they had a deep foundation to support them, their vitality would be greatly damaged. The Yuan family still relied on Huang Song's support. Now that Huang Song had fallen, it was unclear what the Yuan family's attitude would be. Even if Jiang Pingji gave Huang Song the title of hereditary heir for 3 generations, how could the salary support a facade that matched his status? 3 consecutive generations could not make ends meet. Even if there was a mountain of gold and silver, it would be eaten up. Should they be thick-skinned enough to snatch food from the mouths of the merchants? Huang Song said, the alliance only says that 3 generations of male descendants are not allowed to enter officialdom, but you and I have more than one male descendant. Chi Chaolan was shocked. Could it be interpreted in such a way? At first, I didn't know what Lanting was up to, but I slowly figured it out during the journey. She really is not willing to suffer any losses. Huang Song smiled bitterly. Lanting has come to this stage. Whether it's to encroach on other countries or to defend Dongqing, the Emperor's 12 crowns are indispensable. I'm afraid she's the first woman to ascend to the throne since ancient times. In troubled times, outsiders can ignore her being a woman, but once she establishes a country and proclaims herself as an emperor, some acute problems have to be brought to the surface. Chi Chaolan did not react for a moment. What problems? Huang Song said, for example, having children. Lanting has yet to have children. For a country, children were not as simple as an heir. They were also a stabilizing force that stabilized people's hearts. Without children, be it the court officials or the people, who could be at ease? If the emperor passed away one day without an heir, who would be the next emperor? The world, which had been stabilized with great difficulty, would be shattered in an instant. Chi Chaolan said, if she doesn't have children, she'll have one. The world is inherited by the heirs. Do you want the world that Lanting obtained to be a wedding dress for her husband's family? Huang Song asked her. Besides, as the emperor, she's above millions of people. How can there be a husband's family? If she has children, according to her temperament, most likely it will be inherited by the heiress. In this era, the Empress encountered far more trouble than ordinary male emperors. She was walking a path that her predecessor did not, so naturally, it was extremely difficult. Chi Chaolan said, inherited by the heiress. Then the child's biological father. Huang Song looked down and said, most likely killed. For her world, it's normal for a man to die. After listening to Huang Song's analysis, Chi Chaolan vaguely understood the calculations and implications behind this alliance. Bogeo, you mean, she wants to support a woman? Huang Song said, this is inevitable. This will more or less reduce the pressure on the officials to choose an heir. Chi Chaolan said, in that case, this alliance is not only not a bad thing, but a good thing. If everything was as Huang Song had guessed, then Huang Song had worked hard even if he didn't work hard. For the sake of these ties, his branch would definitely not be too bad. If their daughter worked hard and won the Empress's favor, she would definitely have a place in the imperial court in the future. Who would dare to belittle their family? After a while, Chi Chaolan said, she's really brave. Huang Song said. Actually, your husband is more inclined to Lanting having a male heir in the future. Chi Chaolan pretended to be angry and said, why? Are you looking down on women? Chapter 1348. In the eyes of the people, an emperor who was diligent was a good emperor. In the eyes of the officials, an emperor who was healthy, smart, serious, and had a long lifespan was a good emperor. A woman's pregnancy was a job that could not be replaced by others. The heir of the country had to be born by the Empress herself. What accidents happened during childbirth? Dystocia, hemorrhage, suffocation of the child, death of the mother. The emperor that they had raised for more than 10 years was gone just like that. How much pain would the officials feel? In her previous life, Jiang Pingji was obstructed by so many officials. The most fundamental reason was not that they thought it was bad for a woman to be the empress. After all, the devil sitting at the top had fought his way out of chaos. How could the officials care so much about the succession of the royal family? The reason why they objected was for the sake of the stability of the country. Changing emperors frequently was harmful. Medical technology in ancient times was not advanced enough. Many children would die prematurely if they had a headache or fever. It was dangerous and time-consuming for the empress to give birth. The efficiency of childbirth was also a flaw. She had never considered it before, but the problem was in front of her. She had to consider it. Chi Chaolan thought about it seriously. The problem that Huang Song mentioned was indeed difficult to solve. Then, she was about to speak when Huang Song interrupted her. Her temperament is like this. As long as she's around, no one can change her mind. No matter what outsiders said about the daughter, would Jiang Pingji listen to them? Huang Song was also happy to watch the show. If the daughter was really set as the heir, he would benefit from it. There was no reason for him to object. Chi Chaolon said, "Today, we should also make thorough preparations." The preparation she was talking about was naturally to raise her daughter like a son. The education that she should receive must not be neglected at all. Huang Song nodded and suddenly thought of his two sons' examination results. He had suffered for the entire afternoon. If the two boys did not pass, wouldn't it be embarrassing for him? What's the result of the entrance examination of Jinlin Academy in the afternoon? Chi Chaolon smiled and said, "This Jinlin Academy is far better than what the outside world says. Even the family schools of the noble families can't compare to it." Initially, she wanted to be thick-skinned and plead with her parents to at least let her child attend the clan school, so as not to delay his enlightenment. Who asked her to not be able to find a decent teacher in the entire Xiangyang district? When she visited the Golden Scale Academy by chance, she was moved and insisted on sending her child here. The two children worked hard. Their brains were better than their father's and they easily passed the entrance examination. Huang Song was surprised. That good? The gentry clans all revered the clan school, and they rarely looked at the private schools outside. However, his wife was full of praises for this private school, the Golden Scale Academy. Chi Chaolon explained the difference in detail. It was good for the clan to have good academics, but the atmosphere was also bad. Most importantly, some of the children of the poor families in the clan could still go to school. Dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and the son of a mouse can dig holes. Children from poor families always had some disgusting habits. Some didn't like to study and liked to form gangs to bully others. No matter if it was knowledge or upbringing, they could never compare to the children of the clansmen who had been brought up by a particular family. Because of these reasons, the teachers of the family would rarely be strict with their students. Naturally, the bad habits of the children could not be quickly corrected. Lady Qi had just learned that the children of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers, so she was somewhat reluctant. After taking a closer look, she realized that what she saw was very different from what she had imagined. If one didn't get to the bottom of the matter, who would know that those adorable and well-mannered children in the academy all came from commoner families? She didn't know that the Golden Scale Academy was now implementing full-time education. Except for a few, second generations, who could attend day school and had special privileges, most of the children were in school. There was also an additional language etiquette course in the curriculum. This change was made because someone found that the children used the unbearable words, f*ck your mother, to scold others during arguments. Where did he learn this vocabulary from? Naturally, it was learned from the quarrel between the neighbors when the children went home to live temporarily. Although it was a small matter, for those great scholars who regarded the Golden Scale Academy as their painstaking effort, it was naturally disgusting. The great scholars who were deeply rooted in the theory of lineage thought that it was the children's lineage that was causing trouble. A hot-tempered scholar lost his temper on the spot. He deeply felt that the Golden Scale Academy should not recruit students from commoner families. The academy provided the best education. Which headmaster of the academy was not a famous scholar with a reputation outside? With such abundant resources, even a sow could bow and salute, but the students they taught actually scolded people, f*ck your mother. Hopeless. However, Master Yuanjing felt that the children's lineage was not the most important. The most important thing was the influence of the environment around them. To teach children well, they should isolate the harmful environment and work hard to create an atmosphere suitable for learning for the students. If not, why would Mencius's mother move 3 times? Master Yuanjing's combat power was indeed not just for show. He alone suppressed all the opposing voices. Due to Master Yuanjing's status in the education world, the great scholar could only bear with it. The group of people discussed urgently again and finally finalized the rules. The children who entered the academy could stay at home for 7 days in half a year, a semester. The parents could visit the children for half a day every month to avoid alienation. If there were special matters at home, they could ask for temporary leave. In addition, the students must live in the academy for a long time. After 1 or 2 years, the atmosphere was indeed better than before. The children studied seriously, and the great scholars who had some grudges were satisfied. Those nitpicky great scholars with obsessive-compulsive disorder could be satisfied, so naturally, Lady Chi was also satisfied. Yes, so I let the children take the exam, and in the end, they even got 2 places. The only thing that made Chi Chaolan reluctant was the academy's boarding system. The parents could only see the children once a month, which made it seem like a visit to a prisoner. Huang Song smiled and said, "You are indeed the child of Lan, You are indeed capable." Chi Chaolan rolled her eyes at him in amusement. Aristocratic families generally raised their daughters well. Although the teaching was also strict, the content was biased. If they wanted to have the right to train their daughter to become an official, the matter of enlightenment should also be put on the agenda. The couple was worried about this matter. In the end, Huang Song thought of a solution. He threw his daughter to Feng Ju. Feng Ju was speechless. Did he think he was a master? Huang Song was not a fool. He knew that Qing Jing was sent to Master Yuanjing's side. He would most likely be arrested. Feng Ju was thrown to his father, Feng Ren. He still had the same temperament. He was definitely an idle person. When he had nothing to do, he would raise his daughter. If Feng Ju knew his thoughts, he would definitely want to beat him to death. However, Huang Song's acting skills were comparable to Jiang Pingji's, and Feng Ju felt a faint sense of guilt towards him. In the end, he still became the teacher of Huang Song's daughter. Both father and daughter are worrisome. Feng Ju let out a long sigh. Teach the child to pass the time. Huang Song's analysis was not unreasonable. If he trained his daughter here, she would still be able to do well in the imperial court in the future. Don't let the master down. Patting the 3-year-old girl's head, she nodded seriously. Chapter 1349. If it was said that Qing Jing and Feng Ju's refusal to become officials and pledge allegiance was understandable, then Nie Sun's choice was puzzling. Although Nie Sun's illness was serious, he was still very young and his recovery ability was naturally not weak. After a period of nursing, he was more or less recovered. While Nie Sun was recuperating, Feng Jin had also tried to sound out Nie Sun's intentions. He didn't know if Nie Sun didn't understand the hint or if he pretended not to understand, but Nie Sun didn't express his stance on the recruitment. If he didn't take a stand on this matter, it would mean that he had tactfully rejected him. Feng Jin could not understand. What was so good about Huang Song that Nie Sun was willing to bet everything on him? According to his understanding of Nie Sun, he was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, why would he plot against Yuan Xan? Feng Jin hadn't been able to convince Nie Sun, so he simply sent Nie Sun back to Wanzhou to wait for his lord to recruit him. The lord was Nie Sun's cousin. What couldn't a family member say directly? Unexpectedly, before Nie Sun could see Jiang Pingji, who was leading the troops outside, he first saw another relative whom he had expected. On this day, Nie Sun heard that Huang Song and the rest had already arrived in Xiangyang district. His wife, Zhu Qingning, carried their child and sat beside him silently. "Qingyun, do you want to see that person?" While coaxing the child, she stared at her husband who she had lost and found. Ever since she received Nie Sun's letter, she hadn't had a good night's sleep. Sometimes she had nightmares, sometimes she had palpitations. In just a few days, she had become extremely haggard. Her parents were so worried about her that they gave birth to a lot of white hair. Zhu Qingning saw this and felt very uncomfortable in her heart. When she heard that her husband was fine, she felt relieved and started counting with her fingers to calculate when Nie Sun would return. When the husband and wife reunited, she, who was as meticulous as dust, discovered that her husband had something on his mind, and he became much quieter. She did not dare to ask more questions. She could only ask Nie Sun to be more kind to the child every day, hoping that the child would cheer him up again. It's better not to see him. He probably doesn't want to see me either. Nie Sun lowered his eyes. Why add to the awkwardness? Zhu Qingning was startled after hearing this, and her movements of holding the child stiffened a little. She seemed to have never thought that the relationship between Huang Song and her husband Nie Sun would become so bad. When did this happen? Qing Yun, if you have something on your mind, why won't you tell me? Zhu Qingning's eyes were filled with hurt and sadness. You and I. Before he finished speaking, light footsteps could be heard from outside. A figure was kneeling outside the paper door. Master, madam, someone outside the door has sent in a visiting card and mentioned your name. He hopes that Master can meet him in person. When the two of them heard the maid's voice, they could not help but frown. No matter who the visitor was, it was basic etiquette to pay a visit and send a greeting card. However, it was up to the host to decide whether or not to meet the visitor. No matter who the visitor was, the other party didn't have the right to name who he wanted to see, and it was rude of the maidservant to pass the message without permission. Nie Sun was naturally displeased with this kind of behavior. He scolded lightly, "When did you become so unruly?" The maid outside the room stammered. The person who handed over the visiting card used a carriage with the emblem of the Liu family. He has been waiting outside the mansion for almost an hour. Housekeeper tried to persuade him, but the other party insisted on seeing Master before leaving. Housekeeper had no choice but to send this servant over to report. Zhu Qingning frowned and said, "What a rude visitor. How was this a visit to the host?" It was clearly an unruly guest who came forcefully to act like a hooligan. Even if the other party's carriage had the emblem of the Liu family, Zhu Qingning did not think that her husband would be ordered around by the other party and had to show up. However, Nie Sun frowned and analyzed in his mind. In the end, he fixed his thoughts on someone. In this Xiangyang district, there were only a few people who were qualified to use the carriage of the Liu family. The identity could be determined by elimination. It was either Liu Shi, or Liu Zhao. The first two were outside, so the only possibility left was Liu Zhao. However, he had no interaction with Liu Zhao. Why did the other party make such a scene? Nie Sun said, "Let the distinguished guest wait in the flower hall for a while. I will go over after tidying up a little." There were rules when meeting a guest. Nie Sun slightly fixed his appearance to ensure that he looked energetic before he went to meet the guest. He thought that the unruly guest was Liu Zhao, but through the screen in the flower hall, the figure faintly revealed had the unique charm of a woman. It wasn't Liu Zhao. Could it be Liu Shi? However, Liu Shi was still a virgin and had a tough character. Since when did he have such a graceful figure? In terms of age, it didn't match. Within a few steps, Nie Sun had already made countless judgments in his mind. All the inferences pointed to one person. When he walked around the screen, their eyes met. That instant palpitation confirmed Nie Sun's guess. Even if they hadn't seen each other for more than 20 years, the blood in their bodies had always existed. Nie Sun stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he didn't know whether to advance or retreat. He just looked at the person with a complicated expression. This person was none other than Nie Sun's biological mother, Liu Shi's second wife, Gu Zhen. After Gu Zhen was welcomed into the flower hall, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. She was extremely anxious and looked in the direction of the room from time to time. The handkerchief in her hand was almost torn by her. When she saw Nya Sun, she recognized his identity at a glance. She suddenly stood up from the seat. Her eyes were filled with tears and bloodshot. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand even tighter. Gu Zhen's lips moved and trembled. She couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time. You are. Zhu Qingning was also curious about the identity of this unwelcome guest and followed them. He didn't expect the other party to be a charming and beautiful woman. When she saw Nya Sun, she completely lost her composure. She staggered forward and touched Nya Sun's face with her trembling hands. Her fingertips couldn't help but rub the bright red cinnabar mole between his eyebrows. Zhu Qingning held the child in her arms. She first looked at it with a dumbfounded expression. Then, she was so angry that her chest felt stuffy. She didn't mind the beautiful woman's actions, but her husband's action of not dodging or avoiding her made her a little jealous. Zhu Qingning took the initiative and called out softly, "Qingyun, this is." Gu Zhen was brought back to her senses by her voice. She slightly lost her composure and used the handkerchief to press away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She turned to look at Zhu Qingning. "I heard, you." Gu Zhen didn't know how to address Nya Sun at that moment. Through the 2 letters that Meng Heng handed over, she knew that Nya Sun already knew about his family background. However, she didn't explain and recognize him. "This lady is Master Yuanjing's 5 daughters?" Gu Zhen's gaze fell on the swaddling clothes in her arms again. Although there was a certain distance between them, she felt that she had returned to the delivery room many years ago. She tried her best to give birth to the child in her womb. Before she fainted, she only had time to take a look at the child before she was carried away by the midwife. Although it was just a glance, she didn't stop recalling it for so many years. When she saw the child in the swaddling clothes, she seemed to see her son from back then. Gu Zhen couldn't help but say, "This child's facial features are very similar to Qingyun's when he was born." Zhu Qingning was slightly embarrassed by Gu Zhen's words. She didn't expect Gu Zhen to have seen Nya Sun when he was a child. She was jealous just now. Why did Madame Lu visit the residence today? Chapter 1350. Gu Zhen mumbled as if she was afraid of angering Nya Sun. "I heard that you came to Xiangyang district, so I dropped by to take a look." Although she said it was along the way, anyone with a discerning eye could see that she put a lot of thought into her outfit. In order to make her complexion look better, Gu Zhen specially put on delicate makeup. She had a good foundation. She had taken good care of herself over the years and dressed up carefully. She looked like she was only 24 or 25. No wonder Zhu Qingning misunderstood. Nya Sun sighed, "Madame Lu, you've seen me." Gu Zhen's face turned pale. Nya Sun only said half a sentence, but the rest was definitely an excuse to chase her away. "You don't want to see me that much." In a trance, she felt her heart ache so much that she couldn't breathe. Zhu Qingning broke out in a cold sweat for her. Nya Sun said, "It's not that I don't want to see you, but you and I are not the same kind of people. What can I do even if I see you?" The calmer his tone was, the worse Gu Zhen felt. Her tears that she had finally stopped broke down instantly. "How can we not be the same kind of people?" Gu Zhen grabbed Nya Sun's shoulders with both hands and cried with her head down, "Do you know what happened back then was what I wanted? Every time I think of it, I want to cut Meng Zhan to death. If it wasn't for him, how could we have been separated for so many years?" As a legal wife with no status, she was indeed useless. She couldn't protect her son and let him be cheated on by a concubine. He almost died on the cold ground and was trampled by thousands of people before and after his death. Gu Zhen hated him too. How could she not? Nya Sun didn't acknowledge her and she didn't force him. But why didn't he even give her a chance to make it up to him? Zhu Qingning felt more and more upset as she listened. Her eyes were filled with suspicion and she peeked at her husband secretly. I know all of this, but what can I do? What should have happened has already happened, Nie Sun said. Madam Lu, let it go. You can just assume that the baby boy was buried alive and died. I'm the adopted son of Zhongzhao's Nie family, not Meng Zhan's second son. To Nie Sun, the kindness of raising him was far greater than the kindness of giving him life. Gu Zhen was pitiful, but did Nie Sun deserve it? His life was not only brought about by the woman in front of him, but she also missed out on more than just a son. Apart from being related by blood, how were they different from strangers? He did not owe Gu Zhen, and Gu Zhen did not owe him either. There was no point in trying to make it up to her. Nie Sun was willing to treat Gu Zhen as an elder, but he could not force himself to adore her like an adoptive mother. The relationship between parents and children was not something that could be determined by blood. Zhu Qingning listened to their conversation and realized that the Mrs. Lu, in front of her was Lu Shi's second wife, her husband's biological mother. At this time, the daughter in his arms also cried. Babies could not care less about adults. They would cry if they wanted to, regardless of the occasion, place, or time. When Gu Zhen saw this, she immediately held back the sobs in her throat and wiped the tears on her face with a handkerchief. She did not care about her ruined makeup. Zhu Qingning touched it and said in a low voice, he probably peed. This concubine will call the wet nurse over. Is Madam willing to help look after him? Of course, Gu Zhen could not ask for more. When the unique milky fragrance of a baby wafted into her nose, the tears that she had stopped with great difficulty gushed out again. The baby girl in front of him was the daughter of that child. Time passed so quickly. Gu Zhen did not know whether she should be happy or sad. Nie Sun was helpless with his wife's actions. He had wanted to directly cut off Gu Zhen's thoughts. It was enough for the two families to maintain a superficial friendship. There was no need for them to have a deep relationship and talk about relatives. Gu Zhen lowered her head and coaxed the child. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito, as if raising her voice would make Nie Sun unhappy. In the face of such a situation, even a rational person like Nie Sun could not help but feel sympathetic. His calm heart was in chaos. I have no intention of forcing you to acknowledge me. I just want to see if you are doing well and if there is anything I can help with. Gu Zhen spoke in a submissive tone. The more she acted this way, the harder it was for Nie Sun to be forceful. Nie Sun said, I am very well. Gu Zhen said in a pleading tone, then can I come over to see this child often? Nie Sun said, I'm afraid it will be inconvenient. Gu Zhen's face turned completely pale. It was as if someone had stabbed her heart with a knife. Zhu Qingning came over just in time to hear these two sentences. She rolled her eyes at her husband. Why did he only say half of what he wanted to say? She said, does Madame Lu like this child very much? Gu Zhen knew that Zhu Qingning was her daughter-in-law. Unfortunately, her son could not recognize her, much less her daughter-in-law. Of course I like him very much. Zhu Qingning said, if Madame Lu likes him, I will bring the child to visit your residence when I am free. Is that all right? Nie Sun's expression changed, but he did not interrupt her. Gu Zhen nodded hurriedly and could not contain her joy. How can this be considered a visit? If you come, you can stay here permanently. Qingyun's current identity is a little. In order to prove his innocence, it is naturally not appropriate to make it public. Visitors to the residence will be pushed back as much as possible. Madame Lu, don't take his words to heart. That is his temperament. Zhu Qingning said with a smile, let the wet nurse bring the child away to change first. After hearing Zhu Qingning's words, Gu Zhen felt much better. She faintly looked forward to it. She handed the child to the wet nurse who had been waiting for a long time. After some thought, she took off the bracelet on her wrist. I came in a hurry today and did not bring any greeting gifts. I saw that the child was fated with me, and I liked him very much at first sight. Gu Zhen let Zhu Qingning accept the greeting gift on behalf of the child. She said humbly, "This bracelet has been with me for many years. It is quite old. Please don't dislike it." Zhu Qingning had good taste. Naturally, she could see that Gu Zhen's gift was really good. Since it was a gift from her grandmother to her granddaughter, she did not stand on ceremony and accepted it, lest she made the other party sad. She watched reluctantly as the child was carried away by the wet nurse. Gu Zhen only retracted her gaze when the child was out of sight. I also know Lanting's temperament. If it is because of this matter, Nie Sun knew what she wanted to say and flatly refused, "No." Gu Zhen could only swallow the rest of her words. Zhu Qingning saw that the atmosphere, which had eased with great difficulty, was stiff again. He felt helpless. "Then why?" Nie Sun said directly, "I have no intention of becoming an official again." "Why?" Gu Zhen did not seem to expect such an answer from him. She could not help but ask, could it be that Lanting is unwilling? Nie Sun was Jiang Pingji's biological cousin in name and by blood. They were a family. It was not to say that they were completely biased, but they would secretly take care of each other. Huang Song had already been defeated. What was wrong with Nie Sun, as an old official, choosing a new master to assist? Nie Sun looked down and said, "No, it is my own reason." No matter how terrible Yuan Xan was or what disagreements he had with Nie Sun, the only person who could deal with him was Huang Song. However, Nie Sun had bypassed Huang Song and plotted to kill Yuan Xan. No matter what his reason was, at the end of the day, it was also a betrayal to Huang Song. At the same time, it was also the most taboo action of a person in a high position. Who would not be disgusted if officials killed each other because of personal disagreements? When Nie Sun made up his mind to kill Yuan Xan, he had already made a decision. If Huang Song won, he would resign from Huang Song and live in seclusion. Chapter 1351. After that day, Zhu Qingning kept his promise and often brought his daughter to visit Gu Zhen. Gu Zhen was naturally overjoyed. Nie Sun's attitude remained the same. No matter how Gu Zhen tried to please him, he had no intention of softening. This made Zhu Qingning extremely puzzled. "What's wrong with Qingyun?" Zhu Qingning sighed. "Today, she told me what happened in the past. She really has her difficulties." Nie Sun was reading a book in the courtyard. His expression was calm. Zhu Qingning approached him with a smile and curled up into a ball in his arms. Disturbed by his wife's childish behavior, Nie Sun could only free one hand to hug her and the baby in his arms tightly. Zhu Qingning used a gentle voice to slowly recount what he heard and sighed at the end. "Qingyun, there are all parents in the world. She really has her difficulties. Can't you be a little more soft-hearted?" After all, Nie Sun was the person who slept with him. Zhu Qingning understood him the best. There was one thing that she did not understand. He was obviously kind to Gu Zhen on the first day, but he became cold after a few days. "Wunyang, the hearts of people in this world are not as simple as you think. You are so innocent and gullible. How can your husband rest assured?" Nie Sun hugged her with one arm and rested his chin on her shoulder. His voice was a little tired. "According to what you said, she did have her difficulties back then. But speaking the truth doesn't mean that she didn't hide anything. It's good for you to bring the child to visit her in the future. Just don't connect me with her anymore." Nie Sun's temperament was different from ordinary people because of his childhood experience. His adoptive parents had no children and treated him like their own. He was also grateful, but this did not mean that he had forgotten his childhood memories. That memory would not fade even when he was old. That year, he was dug out from the soil. After a few hands, he was sold from Dongqing to Zhongzhou. Someone bought him to ask for a child. The mistress was hot-tempered and violent. She often scolded and beat him because she felt humiliated when she saw him. His existence constantly reminded her that she could not have a child. In the cold winter, the woman pressed his head into the water. The more he struggled, the harder she used. When he was 3 or 4 years old, he simply held his breath and pretended to be dead. The other party threw him into the water and left while scolding him. Of course, this couldn't be the end. Not long after he became a child beggar, he was targeted by a trafficker who specialized in abducting and selling child beggars and sold to the next family. He had met all kinds of people. Someone had taken a fancy to his face and bought him into a men's establishment. If the place had not been burned down, Nya Sun would not have been able to escape. Someone purely had the hobby of torturing young children for physical pleasure. He had broken his arms and legs, and the little finger of his right hand was still stiff. His body bore the scars of his childhood. Some of them had healed long ago, while others were still stubbornly present. Nya Sun was a tenacious person. If he didn't want to die, he naturally wouldn't die. Everyone had parents, and so did he. Where were his parents? Did they have no choice but to sell him because their family was poor, or did they encounter a great change that caused him to be kidnapped by human traffickers? He wanted to understand. This obsession kept him alive. At that time, Nya Sun probably didn't expect his parents to be so noble and unattainable. If he had known earlier, perhaps he wouldn't have had to suffer so much. It would have been better to bang his head against the wall and beg for an afterlife. Why? Zhu Qingning turned her head and kissed him on the cheek, interrupting his memories. Now, she still acted like an innocent young girl and said coquettishly, "Qingyun, you should at least tell me the reason. You're always unwilling to explain, and others will misunderstand that you're an unfilial son." Nya Sun smiled bitterly. He didn't say it because he didn't want his wife to know. You'll know when you pay attention to eldest sister-in-law's situation. Zhu Qingning didn't understand. What does this have to do with eldest sister-in-law? She really didn't understand. This was clearly a knot between Nya Sun and Gu Zhen. How did eldest sister-in-law get involved? Nya Sun looked down. Zhu Qingning placed the child in the sleeping basket at the side, held his right hand with both hands, and kissed his little finger. You're always like this. Nya Sun felt that his hair was about to go bald from worry. He was at his wit's end when it came to his wife. If you don't want to be like this, then explain. You also know that if you don't explain clearly, I won't understand sometimes. Nya Sun had no choice but to mention a few words in her ear. The smile on Zhu Qingning's face instantly froze. This, Nya Sun said, "Wunyang, if it's possible. I really want to bring you back to see my parents and tell them that I'm married." Zhu Qingning only came back to her senses after a long while and said, "My actions these days. Aren't they making things difficult for you?" Nya Sun whispered, "As long as it's you, it's not difficult." As the end of the year approached, Jiang Pingji let some people return to Wanzhou first. Meng Heng was one of them. When he arrived, he couldn't wait to see his wife and child. The smile on his face was more like a child's. His wife wiped his sweat and said angrily, "You've traveled a long way. Aren't you afraid that the child will be dirty? Go wash up and then kiss him." Meng Heng could only obey. He took a comfortable bath and changed into new clothes. He asked about the situation at home, and his wife told him everything. "Is Qingyun being taken care of?" Meng Heng asked. Although the two brothers didn't acknowledge each other as relatives, Meng Heng felt guilty towards Nia Sun. After all, they had schemed against each other, and now it was time to make up for it. His wife wanted to say something but stopped. Meng Heng asked her, "What's wrong? Is there someone making things difficult for Qingyun?" "No, it's just. But what?" Meng Heng ate some pastries to fill his stomach while he looked at his wife with concern. His wife twirled her handkerchief in a dilemma. A while ago, mother-in-law went to the manor to visit second brother and sister-in-law. She didn't have a good time. Meng Heng wasn't surprised. This is in line with Qingyun's temperament. If they were to acknowledge each other and have a family reunion right away, Meng Heng would feel that Nia Sun had been possessed. His wife recounted the events of that day once more. She and Zhu Qingning were close friends and sisters-in-law, so there were some topics that were not taboo. The two sisters-in-law had the same opinion. They were both mothers, and they always felt that Nia Sun was too cold. Meng Heng listened and clicked his tongue. After so many years, she still has the same temperament. His wife lamented, brother-in-law indeed had a hard time in his early years, but there's no lack of parents in the world. How can he be so cold-hearted? Meng Heng said, "Mother, if you continue like this, Qingyun's heart will only become harder and colder." His wife was dumbfounded. Mother-in-law treats him so well, it depends on the situation. Mother has been in Wanzhou for a while. Not to mention sending people to the manor. Has she ever asked about you and the child? His wife was stunned and said that she hasn't. Not only had she not, she had once brought the child to the manor to pay her respects, but the maid had said that he was already asleep. Later, she and her sister-in-law, Zhu Qingning, went to the manor together and met her mother-in-law for the first time. She was really beautiful, and it was hard to tell her age. Meng Heng sighed. "I told mother that Qingyun is still alive." "How long has it been?" His wife still didn't understand, and Meng Heng wasn't in the mood to explain. After all, it wasn't right to speak ill of his mother in front of his wife. Was Gu Zhen a good mother? To Lu Shi, she was probably the best mother in the world. Not only was she good with her words, but she was also good with her actions. To the two brothers, she would always be good with her words, and she would only tell others how good she was. Before Meng Heng wrote to Gu Zhen, she didn't know that her youngest son was still alive. On the surface, Meng Heng was her only son. But what was her attitude toward her eldest son? He lived in the Meng residence as a son of a concubine and was constantly on guard against his father's concubines. In order to save himself, he was willing to become a hostage and live in Shangjing. The Meng residence basically didn't give him any expenses, and he had to pawn a few items from when he was 1 year old to barely make ends meet. He studied in a private school and had a high cultivation level. While studying, he sold his calligraphy and paintings to earn some pocket money. Once, he wrote a letter full of hope to his mother, hoping that she would take pity on him and take care of him. Gu Zhen took care of him and sent him 100 taels of silver. Other than the money, she didn't say anything. At that time, Meng Heng already had a sense of honor. His face was burning as he held the money his mother gave him. The boy's servant said, "Madam, did you think that Lang Jun was begging her?" Meng Heng, who was 11 or 12 years old, felt that his pride and dignity had been shattered by his mother. He begged for this money. He begged for his birth mother's care and love, and in the end, he got money. Meng Heng got married at 23, and it was because the elders of the Meng family couldn't bear to watch it anymore and betrothed him to the daughter of a branch of a declining aristocratic family. Did mother say a word or two about this? Before Meng Zhan died, he could say that the Meng family was powerful and she didn't dare to ask for her son's sake. Now that Meng Zhan's body had been cold for a few days, she still ignored her eldest son and treated her eldest daughter-in-law and eldest grandson coldly. She was such a mother, but she poured out her heart and lungs to her second son, whom she hadn't seen for more than 20 years. Nye-sun wasn't stupid. The more Gu-jin wanted to make up for her second son and treated him like air, the colder he would be. Her eldest son had a mother-son relationship with her, but he was still so cold. Then what right did her second son, whom she hadn't seen for more than 20 years, have to deserve her love? Did she really want to get her son back and make up for the lack of motherly love? Or did she want to be forgiven to ease the guilt in her heart? Meng Heng felt that Nye-sun could see it clearly. His wife didn't know what Meng Heng was thinking and sighed. It wasn't easy for grandma in her early years. I heard that she was often bedridden. Can't you be more understanding? It wasn't easy for the daughter of the Gu family to get to where she was today. She doesn't want to take medicine to cure her illness. Can others force her? Meng Heng said. It wasn't easy. Maybe it was. His wife looked dissatisfied. How could her husband say that? Although mother was the daughter of the Gu family in her early years, her treatment was similar to that of the legal aunt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have married into the Meng family in the past. I asked some elders and they said that the legal aunt treated mother really well. The people who were part of her dowry were all her confidants and all of them were capable. Meng Heng said. After that, she remarried to Lu Shi. Everyone in the Lu family respects her. Now, the Lord has earned her the position of Empress Dowager. As her sons, it's best for us to maintain our current situation if it's for her own good. Chapter 1352. Because Nye-sun had told the truth, Zhu Qingning felt uncomfortable facing Gu-jin. In order not to expose herself, she could only reduce the frequency of her visits to the manor. She did not stay for long each time. Zhu Qingning was also a woman who had been a daughter and a mother. She could tell what a mother who truly loved her child was like from her words and actions. It could not be said that this mother-in-law did not do a good job, but her kindness was only on the surface. It felt unreal. Gu-jin did not know Zhu Qingning's thoughts. She had been worrying about Nye-sun's future. However, Nye-sun had been avoiding her. She could not have a long talk with him to remind him to teach him. She could only relay many things to her daughter-in-law, Zhu Qingning. She brought up the past again today, hoping that Zhu Qingning could persuade Nye-sun to become an official. She more or less understood the knot in Nye-sun's heart. However, Nye-sun was Jiang Pingji's cousin. There were not so many taboos in the family. It would only take a few words to promote him. Zhu Qingning knew that Gu-jin meant well, but her words were indescribably harsh to the ear. She did not think that her husband had to become an official. It was good to be a famous scholar with achievements in education. He could still be famous. If Nye-sun really wanted to become an official, he did not have to rely on his relatives. Her mother-in-law, Gu-jin, spoke matter-of-factly. Not only did she belittle the wise Duke of Lanting, but she also belittled Nye-sun. Zhu Qingning was also a clever person. She felt uncomfortable, but she did not show it on her face. She pretended to mention Meng Heng's wife casually. Has sister-in-law been here these few days? A few days ago, she said that she had some new designs. She was thinking of embroidering a little dress for Nan Nan. Nan Nan was her daughter's nickname. Every time she called her, she would look over curiously. She was very cute. Gu-jin heard her mention her eldest daughter-in-law. She teased her granddaughter and laughed. She doesn't like to come. Maybe there are many rules in the manor and she is not used to it. Zhu Qingning heard some dissatisfaction from her mother-in-law. Women who knew how to fight in the house were clever. Her words seemed plain, but there was actually a hidden meaning. Zhu Qingning understood the meaning behind her mother-in-law's words. She despised her sister-in-law for being of low birth and not knowing the rules. She probed further and came to the conclusion that Nyesun's words were true. This mother-in-law's attitude towards her eldest son was too cold. Of course, this indifference could also be brushed off by saying that her daughter-in-law was of low birth and the eldest grandson she gave birth to was not pleasing to her. Mothers-in-law always had special privileges. It was reasonable for her to vent her anger on her grandson and son because she didn't like her daughter-in-law. From then on, Zhu Qingning went even less. However, Gu Zhen liked to let her carry the child and chat with her. Gradually, Zhu Qingning realized that this mother-in-law was becoming more and more like a mother-in-law. Although he didn't do anything to her, his words and attitude were much more forceful. This kind of toughness was not conscious, it was completely unintentional. Nyesun said, "Go accompany mother-in-law or help father-in-law write the letter, I'll help you send her away." Every day, she goes to pay her respects before dawn. My heart aches for her. He had always been a fickle and rational person. If others treated him sincerely, he would return the favor with sincerity. In the beginning, he was also moved by Gu Zhen. However, after calming down and looking at her attitude towards his elder brother and himself, his warm heart turned cold. He could treat her as an ordinary elder, but he really couldn't force himself to be a loving mother and a filial son. Zhu Qingning said, "Mother-in-law won't be angry because of this, right?" She had been married to Nyesun for so long, but she had never played the role of a daughter-in-law. However, when she was in the boudoir, she had heard how difficult it was to serve a mother-in-law. What's she angry about? Nyesun said, "The Duke of Lanting will be back soon. I reckon he won't be in the mood to care about us." If Nyesun was a little more stupid, he would probably be moved by Gu Zhen's actions. Unfortunately, he was too perceptive and saw things too clearly. Jiang Pingji was scheduled to return after the new year, but the construction work outside was on the right track earlier than expected, so she returned early. That day happened to be the 25th of the new year, the day the Golden Scale Academy had a half-year holiday. It was rare for Nyesun, the homebody, to go out. The entire Xiangyang district was immersed in a sea of celebration. Various shops also imitated the reception house and introduced discount activities. Those who don't know would think it's the new year. Nyesun chuckled. His smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes, but there was a bit of absent-mindedness in them. Perhaps, this is what the people want. Zhu Qingning looked at the young general, who was riding a horse slowly in the distance. He was like the unruly and unrestrained youth in Langya's Pear Blossom book. Jiang Pingji did not change back into her female clothes. She was still in her military attire. She looked mighty and extraordinary. Who knew how many infatuated men and resentful women she had provoked? Zhu Qingning leaned against the window and rested his chin on his hand as he lamented, "My foresight back then was really not bad." Nyesun felt that something was wrong. What foresight? Zhu Qingning chuckled and joked, "One year during the flower festival, my father intended to choose a husband for me. I took a fancy to her at first sight." Nyesun. Who? Which little demon? Zhu Qingning said, "My father said that the Duke of Lanting and I were not compatible and refused to tell me the reason. Later, I found out that the ideal man was a girl." Nyesun, Yaya, the little girl in his arms spat out a big bubble. When the bubble burst, she secretly rubbed her saliva on her father's clothes. Zhu Qingning smiled mischievously. "Lang Jun, are you jealous of this?" Nyesun took a deep breath and waved his hand weakly. "I don't care about women." Whether the woman referred to Zhu Qingning or Jiang Pingji, it was up to the benevolent and the wise to the wise. The return of a portion of Jiang Pingji's troops was a major event that shook several prefectures. Feng Zhen and the others were so angry that they gritted their teeth. She did not even let people celebrate the new year in peace. Was their lord not sincere? They cursed in their hearts but smiled on the surface. How infuriating. Did anything major happen while I was away in Wanzhou? Even though Jiang Pingji's energy was frightening and she had ridden a horse for a long time, she still looked tired. Overall, she was in good spirits. Naturally, there was nothing. The rear and front lines had maintained a certain frequency of communication. If something had happened, she would have known long ago. However, Su Ke said, "The first madam is here. She is now living in her residence in the main city." The first madam. Aunt Shu is here. She called Gu Zhen Aunt Shu out of habit. She realized that Meng Heng was also among the welcoming party, so she calmly changed the way she addressed her. Mother's health isn't good. She can't get used to taking those medicines. Her condition hasn't improved. Why isn't she in Chongzhou under father's care? Why did she come all the way to Xiangyang? Su Ke said, the first madam heard news about Nie Qingyun and specially rushed over to meet him. Su Ke was also aware of the entanglement between Meng Heng and Nie Sun. Jiang Pingji calmly replied, "Oh. You've met him." Su Ke said with emotion, "The first madam has a motherly heart. It's just that Nie Qingyun has been avoiding her." Jiang Pingji did not even bat an eyelid. Based on Su Ke's words, Gu Zhen would not be leaving anytime soon. Jiang Pingji sighed and said, "All these years, I've been fighting all over the place and haven't had much time to reunite with my family. As a child, I feel very guilty. Since mother is also in Xiangyang this year, I should organize this year's New Year's banquet well. I can't let mother make a long trip and leave with regrets." In the large Lu residence, if there was anyone Jiang Pingji was most unwilling to act with, it would probably be Gu Zhen. She did not know how to evaluate this woman. She was the first to discover that Lu Shi had been possessed. Her reaction was also the calmest. The system had once asked why the second madam could calmly admit her identity when she discovered that something was wrong. She had also said that it was because the two of them had reached an agreement. What agreement? She allowed the second madam to enjoy the so-called great transformation. She would inherit Lu Shi's legal identity. Chapter 1353. To some extent, Jiang Pingji and Nie Sun were the same kind of people. She seemed unreasonable because she was too rational. In the eyes of outsiders, Gu Zhen was a competent stepmother. She wrote many letters to ask about her well-being almost every year. If it wasn't Jiang Pingji but someone else, they would have been touched by her and their hearts would have been warmed. Jiang Pingji was an exception. She didn't mind others describing her as heartless. No matter how much Gu Zhen cared for her over the years, her heart was never warmed. Because she knew very well that she and Gu Zhen were just plastic flowers. It looked good, but it was fake. What was real couldn't be fake, and what was fake couldn't be real. Gu Zhen knew in her heart that Jiang Pingji was not the Lu Shi she had raised. How sincere was her concern and concern? Did Jiang Pingji look like a child who lacked calcium since childhood and grew up without love? Gu Zhen wasn't related to her at all. How could she sincerely treat someone else's family as her own? If she was really touched and fell head first into it, that would be really stupid. Her relationship with Gu Zhen was at most an ally. She gave Gu Zhen a great creation, and Gu Zhen helped her hide her identity. They both took what they needed and hit it off. How much true feelings could they have without this deal? Jiang Pingji didn't show it on her face. She tilted her head and listened to everyone's report, but she couldn't help but yawn in her heart. After listening, she said with a serious face, "We'll be busy before the new year. Please pay more attention and try to stop writing and rest as soon as possible." Qiguan Rang and the other old foxes couldn't help but twitch their mouths. They looked like they knew it. Young C and the others were even bolder. They couldn't help but roll their eyes. It was the same thing every year. The trick was old and nothing new. Every year, they were tired of it and applied for a new trick. Even Hanyu, who had just joined for a year, couldn't help but sigh. He had been fooled once. How could he be fooled a second time? He didn't know that Jiang Pingji thought this trick could be played until she retired. She planned to work overtime every day during her reign. How could her subordinates get annual leave? Haha, that's impossible. After the meeting, Jiang Pingji was ready to take some people out for a tour. She had been in charge for so many years. She wouldn't feel a sense of accomplishment if she didn't take a good look at the changes and progress in her territory. Lord, everyone left one after another. Only Qiguan Rang had something to report, so he stayed behind. Jiang Pingji asked, Lady Takshu is still locked up and waiting for my lord's punishment, Qiguan Rang said. Do you want to go and take a look, my lord? She's a poor woman, too. But who asked a pitiful person to have a hateful side? In any case, we used to be master and servant. I'll send her off to fulfill this friendship. She stood up from her seat, flicked her sleeves, and said to Qiguan Rang, Wenjing, let's go and take a look. Qiguan Rang reminded her worriedly, Lady Takshu is a little strange. My lord must not get too close to her. Takshu's appearance was not considered top-notch, but her captivating eyes were somewhat evil. Many soldiers had been affected by them previously. Jiang Pingji said, Of course I know she's weird. I wanted to let her go at first, but who knew she'd come looking for death? At first, she thought that Takshu was a double agent. However, she later realized that she was a triple agent. On one hand, she was instigated by the main system. On the other hand, she listened to Lu Shi's orders. At the same time, she was the spy that the time traveler had placed in the Lu residence. Of course, this last identity was to cover up the other two. Takshu probably did not know that there were so many big shots behind her, nor did she know what they were using her for. Jiang Pingji thought that was probably Takshu's limit. However, after careful investigation, she realized that she had missed one person. The reason why she had missed this person was that Jiang Pingji was too conceited. Now that she thought about it carefully, there might be other developments. Takshu, long time no see. Takshu had been locked up by Qiguan Rang from one small dark room to another that was even more heavily guarded. She had not seen the light of day for a long time. Her skin had become deathly pale. She had also lost a lot of weight. One could almost see the blue blood vessels buried under her thin skin. She had dark circles under her eyes. It was obvious that she had not slept for a long time. Fatigue was written all over her face. When the small dark room opened, the sunlight from outside shone straight in. It made Takshu, who had not seen the light for a long time, feel extremely uncomfortable. She raised her hand to block the sunlight in front of her eyes and watched Jiang Pingji walk against the light. Hee, Lang Jun. Takshu was no longer as docile as before. Her gaze was a little murky and fierce. When she thought of the suffering she had suffered in the past few days, her hatred for Jiang Pingji increased. Jiang Pingji said, Lang Jun. I heard from Wenjing that you didn't say that before. Takshu said in a strange tone, You're just a lonely soul. Of course, I'm not calling you. My poor Lang Jun, your nest has been occupied by a dove. It's hard to say whether it's a dove occupying a magpie's nest. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest and laughed. On the contrary, all of you are scheming against me. Did I dig up your ancestral graves in my previous life? Or did I go disco surf on your graves? Do you really think I'm easy to bully? Even though so many years had passed, Jiang Pingji still remembered the details of when she had just transmigrated. There was a question that had been overlooked, but it was still a mystery. How did Lu Shi die? According to the system, he knocked his head. He was frightened by the bandits and had a high fever. He could not swallow his last breath and died. This explanation was reasonable, but Jiang Pingji felt that something was wrong. When she woke up in Lu Shi's body, his body temperature was normal. In other words, the time between her arrival and Lu Shi's death was very close. The future world's definition of death was spiritual death, where one's spiritual power would completely dissipate. As a big boss who had reached the limit of her brain, Jiang Pingji was naturally very sensitive to spiritual power. Even though she was still weak at that time, she did not find any traces of Lu Shi's spiritual power. It would take half an hour for his spiritual power to completely dissipate. Half an hour was enough for his body to cool down. There was a contradiction between these 2 points. Unless someone took away Lu Shi's soul before she regained consciousness. If that was the case, many clues would become clear. This was also one of the reasons why Jiang Pingji suspected that Lu Shi was still alive. The two of them did not hide their conversation from Qiguan Rang. When Jiang Pingji admitted it, his hand that was waving the fan paused for a moment, then returned to normal. Takshu, if you can cooperate and answer a few questions of mine, I can let you go. Takshu sneered. Do you think you can buy people's hearts this way? Even if you kill me, it will take me to the Elysium. I don't know if there's an Elysium in this world. I only know that those who plot against me will die under my sword sooner or later. Not to mention that she did not do anything, even if she really dug up someone's ancestral grave in her previous life and went disco surf on their graves, the enemy would not be able to capture her without putting up a fight. Chapter 1354. Who doesn't know how to brag? I just hope you won't be scared silly in the future. If her master had not stopped Takshu from making a move, she would have found a way to do something to her. How would she have allowed her to be so presumptuous? Jiang Pingji said, I'm not afraid of being scared silly. I'm afraid that the enemy will be the first to be scared silly. Takshu clenched her teeth tightly. She refused to reveal any information about the main system. A demon like you who possesses a body won't have a good ending. Don't waste your energy. I won't betray God. Takshu thought she was tight-lipped, but how did she know that Jiang Pingji really did not get anything out of her? Even so, Jiang Pingji still had to praise the main system's ability to brainwash people. She sighed and said, if the thing behind you is willing to use this brainwashing ability elsewhere, I guess all the creatures in the world will become its most loyal believers. People will not dare to go west. When that time comes, will there still be a situation where the feudal lords are divided? They would have been unified long ago. Why was the Red Lotus group so rampant back then? Why was it easier for religious doctrines to spread in troubled times? Because the people did not have the courage to face reality in troubled times. They were more willing to entrust their souls to faith. Let me give you an easy-to-understand example. The poor people were powerless to change their fate. Faith would tell them that they suffered in this life because of the sins they committed in their previous life. As long as they paid off this debt of abuse in this life and accumulated merit, they would be rich and happy in their next life. If they did not settle down in this life and did not pay off the sins of their previous life, they would continue to suffer in their next life and would not have a good ending. In the face of such threats, the people who had no ability to distinguish would naturally be shocked. That was the horror of brainwashing. Jiang Pingji really did not understand. The main system had the ability to hide from her for nearly 10 years. Its ability was naturally not comparable to that of the good-for-nothing system. If it was so capable, it could roll up its sleeves and fight. Why did it have to push out a puppet that could not do anything but spoil things? If it brainwashed the people in the world, how could the other feudal lords fight? They could not achieve their goals after scheming for so long. What was the other party trying to achieve? On second thought, the system was secretive about the dimensional patrol merchants. Perhaps the main system was also afraid of its natural enemy and had no choice but to cower. Thinking of this, Jiang Pingji gloated. In the face of such merciless mockery, Takshu's pale and bloodless face was flushed with anger. She glanced at Qiguan Rang, who was standing behind Jiang Pingji. Anger flashed in her eyes. He knew that Jiang Pingji was an evildoer who had been possessed by a wandering spirit, yet he was indifferent. Sure enough, she had been controlled by that demon's seductive sorcery. Takshu, you have to think this through. To me, if you're not willing to cooperate with me, then you're worthless. I don't have the slightest bit of patience for worthless people. Jiang Pingji pulled out the god-slaying sword with a smile. The snow-white blade exuded an icy aura. Are you really not afraid of death? Takshu looked at the knife in Jiang Pingji's hand in horror. The blade was right next to her neck. If she moved a little closer, she would be able to cut a wound. If you really wanted to kill me, would you still be talking so much nonsense? Jiang Pingji leaned close to her ear and whispered. Do you really think I can't bear to part with it? You seem to think too highly of yourself. Takshu smiled sinisterly. Kill him then. Oh. Jiang Pingji responded. The sound of a sharp blade piercing through flesh was heard in the air. The smile on Takshu's face froze. She lowered her head slightly. The long knife had directly pierced through her. Jiang Pingji had a sense of propriety. She ensured that Takshu would definitely die, but she could also let her linger on for a few breaths. Do you really think I don't know anything? Jiang Pingji breathed into Takshu's ear. Her lips opened and closed as she spat out a name. Takshu's eyes widened in shock when she heard it. Finally, she breathed her last unwillingly. She died with everlasting regret. Jiang Pingji straightened up. The long knife in her hand slid out of Takshu's flesh. The strong smell of blood permeated the air. Why did you kill her, my lord? Qiguan Rang asked. She's worthless. It's impossible for her to be used by me. Is it a waste of food to keep her alive? Qiguan Rang was speechless. When he came into contact with Takshu previously, she kept saying that Jiang Pingji was a wandering spirit that had been possessed. Qiguan Rang had long been mentally prepared. Therefore, he calmly accepted this fantasy setting. Can you reveal your original name, my lord? Jiang Pingji said. Qiguan Rang said honestly, it's not as good as Lu Shi's. Could he say that his lord's name sounded like a certain new dish in the guest house? The pan chicken. He had this wicked thought, but he did not have the guts to say it out loud. Jiang Pingji said, a name is just a code. Whether it's Lu Shi or Jiang Pingji, they're both called by others. Qiguan Rang smiled and said, my lord is open-minded. Although the saints always talked about supernatural powers and gods, the people were still very respectful of ghosts and gods. They also believed in the existence of ghosts and gods. As an ancient person, Qiguan Rang naturally could not jump out of this fence. He asked, my lord, there's something I don't understand. Jiang Pingji said, ask away. Qiguan Rang shifted his gaze to Takshu's corpse on the ground. He wanted to say something but stopped. Jiang Pingji knew what he wanted to ask. She simply said, I don't know how I woke up from Lu Shi's body. The situation was critical at that time, so I didn't think too much. Later, through clues, I discovered that someone was manipulating everything in the dark. According to the preliminary information, the other party is very ambitious. Not just the whole world, but I'm afraid they want to plunder the fate of the whole human world, or the fate of a country. The concept of fate was illusory. Anything that was related to the country must be related to millions of people. When Qiguanrang heard this, he frowned and looked at Jiang Pingji with a worried gaze. She waved her hand at him and said, "That thing seems to be afraid of something. It doesn't dare to come out and hurt me directly. At most, it can play tricks." Qiguanrang said, "My lord, please deal with it carefully. Everything is for your own sake." Jiang Pingji laughed and said, "Wenjing's reaction is really interesting. If an ordinary person knew that I'm a wandering ghost of unknown origin, they would be scared out of their wits even if they don't rush to find a master or an eminent monk to kill me. I feel uncomfortable that you accepted it so easily." Qiguanrang said, "Is my lord an evil person?" Jiang Pingji shook her head. "Although I'm not considered a good person, I can't be considered evil either. At least I have a clear conscience in the things I do." Qiguanrang said, "Then is my lord an evil spirit?" Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "If an evil spirit sees me, I'll turn around and run." Qiguanrang said, "If that's the case, why should I be afraid? So what if my lord is an evil spirit? Wars are everywhere, and the people have no way to live. The gods in the sky don't care about the lives of the common people. Instead, evil spirits come out to uphold justice. So what if we worship evil spirits as our masters? The gods and Buddhas don't care about the lives of the living. Evil spirits come out to unify the world and return peace to the people." Chapter 1355. Qiguanrang's straightforwardness made Jiang Pingji smile. She said, "Wenjing, are you willing to be my right-hand man in your next life?" The angelic Qiguanrang fell silent. He frowned as if this was a difficult decision for him. It was obvious that a promise could make Jiang Pingji happy. This life was this life. Who knew that in the next life, Qiguanrang would put on a serious expression? He sighed. "Is it not enough for you to be a slave in this life? Do you want me to be your slave?" Jiang Pingji was speechless. "Look at you. What did I do to you? Do you want me to be your slave? Can you plow the fields or pull the cart?" Qiguanrang thought about the mountain of work that piled up every day. He couldn't help but grieve. "I misspoke. I'm worse than a slave." Jiang Pingji was speechless. She had only stood him up for 7 to 8 years of annual leave. It didn't even add up to 2 months. He was really resentful. Qiguanrang said, "If there's a next life, Rang should be more careful. I can't sell myself for a few hundred taels of silver." Why did Qiguanrang fall into Jiang Pingji's trap? Wasn't the fuse a few hundred taels of silver? Jiang Pingji was as evil as she was now. She saw Qiguanrang's potential and bought him for a few hundred taels of silver. Mr. Wei is looking for a son-in-law, but Wenjing has no assets. Which do you want to cut? At that time, Qiguanrang was ordered by his teacher to travel thousands of miles to Hejin County to visit Wei Yuan. He wanted to use his connections to see if he could get an empty position in the officialdom. He was considered an official now. Whatever opportunities he had in the officialdom would depend on his own abilities. Unexpectedly, Wei Yuan's backyard was ruined by Meng Liang's friends. Wei Yuan's eldest daughter was unfortunately affected and lost her chastity. Wei Yuan was worried about his eldest daughter's marriage. He took a liking to Qiguanrang. Before he could test Qiguanrang, 2 uninvited guests climbed over the wall. It was Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin's appearance that completely disrupted Qiguanrang's original life trajectory and arrangements. Once they met, it would be a lifelong mistake. It had nothing to do with romance or romance. Now that he thought about it, it was still vivid in his mind. It was impossible to organize a decent wedding without money. Even with his father-in-law, Wei Yuan, secretly subsidizing him, Qiguan Rang was still struggling to make ends meet. Jiang Pingji's actions at that time could be described as profiting from a burning house. In the end, Qiguan Rang boarded the pirate ship. His gaze was warm. Back then, he would never have imagined that the person in front of him would be able to walk so far. Send someone to clean up the body. He sheathed the god-slaying saber and said, "It's getting late. Do you want to go to the reception house for a meal?" Qiguan Rang thought that Jiang Pingji wanted to visit incognito, so he nodded in agreement. Under Wei Si's management, the reception house had opened up throughout the territories under Jiang Pingji's rule. The prices of the food there were targeted at the middle and high-income groups. Almost every wealthy family would order a few tables for their weddings and funerals. Naturally, business was good. It was the favorite place of the old Tao Tai. Jiang Pingji also generously made the recipes for home-cooked dishes and some dishes that didn't cost much to make public in order to not squeeze out ordinary restaurants and pubs. She differentiated the customer groups to minimize the phenomenon of competing with the people for profits so that the people could also benefit from it. This method was indeed effective. It greatly increased the flow of people in the surrounding areas. Many merchants liked to open shops near the reception house. Gradually, the prototype of a business circle was formed. The reception house could be considered one of the original contributors to the prosperity of Xiangyang district. The reception house was one of the programs for compensating the families of the fallen soldiers. At the same time, it was also the place where corruption and mistakes were most likely to occur. This program had always been managed by Wei Si. Even if Qiguan Rang was worried about Wei Si, he had to admit that Wei Si did an excellent job. Not to mention corruption and mistakes, one had to use a magnifying glass to look for flaws. "Zixiao, you're doing well, right?" Jiang Pingji booked a private room and said with a smile, "The reception house's business is good." Qiguan Rang said, "It's more than good. After settling the accounts last year, the net income was 2 million strings of coins. A net profit of 2 million strings of coins. After deducting various costs, it was considered a huge profit." He really didn't know where so many gluttons came from. Not to mention chaotic times, even in prosperous times, it was a monopoly that the court feared. Other than the reception house, Wei Si's storytelling team also earned a lot. On the surface, the benefits were not as good as the reception house, but the hidden value was terrifying. Wei Si relied on the manipulation of public opinion to turn thousands of people into Jiang Pingji's diehard fans. Other than promoting Jiang Pingji crazily, Wei Si also used storybooks to expand the contributions of the female soldiers. He issued official documents of honorary family to every female soldier's family. Who wouldn't be excited when a family whose ancestors were peasants were singled out and praised by the officials? Official documents still used paper as a carrier. In the eyes of ordinary people, their status was equivalent to an imperial edict. This move indirectly improved the status of women among the people. Even the number and frequency of female babies being abandoned were greatly reduced. The more capable Wei Si was, the more Qiguan Rang was afraid of him. However, he had a discussion with Jiang Pingji previously, so he could only observe Wei Si in secret. Earning 2 million strings of coins a year, Wei Si was a business genius who was held back by overtime and the Lord. Jiang Pingji said, "Wenjing, aren't you curious why Zixiao is so loyal to me?" Qiguan Rang waved his fan and said unhappily, "There must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. We have to guard against it." Wei Si was indeed too strange. Jiang Pingji said, "Wenjing, do you know where I come from?" Qiguan Rang shook his head. other than knowing that his lord was called Dipanji. No, Jiangpingji, he didn't know anything else. However, thinking about it, he knew that his lord was so outstanding now. She must have been a dragon among men in the past. Jiangpingji said, I come from the future 20 or 30,000 years in the future. Qiguan Rang was dumbfounded. The fan in his hand hit his face with a slap. What? 20 or 30,000 years in the future. Jiangpingji said, I trust Wei Ci so much because he was my lover in his previous life. In this life, he must have forgotten to drink Meng Po's soup. Qiguan Rang was speechless. He prided himself on being smart, but he actually didn't think of this. Jiangpingji was vague about the main point. She successfully made Qiguan Rang think that Wei Ci also came from 20 or 30,000 years in the future. She didn't lie. At most, she didn't say it completely. Using history as a mirror, we can see the rise and fall. Does my lord know about the future? Jiangpingji shook her head. She really didn't know. Even though Jiangpingji was a poor student of liberal arts, she knew that the historical process of this world was different from that of her world. The relevant historical records were all buried in the chaos of war. No one knows what happened in ancient times. Jiangpingji said, It's okay if you don't know about history, because I will create my own history. Perhaps this is my responsibility for appearing here. Qiguan Rang's expression was somewhat blank. Chaos of war. Chaos of war again. Will there be chaos of war 20 or 30,000 years in the future? Chapter 1356. Jiangpingji suddenly dropped a big bomb on Qiguan Rang, causing him to collapse. He couldn't be bothered with Wei Ci anymore. He desperately wanted to know what the future world would be like. Although many novels said that ancient people had low IQ, that was not the case. Their ability to accept things was surprisingly strong. The ignorant ancient people always liked to explain things they didn't understand with supernatural means, which was why there were so many myths and legends. To Qiguan Rang, the contents of Jiangpingji's narration were the means of a deity. However, immortals relied on their own abilities to soar through the clouds, while the people of the future relied on technology to do things that even immortals could not do. After a brief description, Qiguan Rang immediately became interested in the word technology. He asked, In that case, isn't the woodworking workshop the prototype of technology? Jiangpingji nodded. This is also the reason why I strongly support Zhangping, Shaoguang, and the others. A person's imagination and creativity are limitless. Qiguan Rang sighed. If that's the case, Rang doesn't feel distressed about the hundreds of thousands of strings of money allocated every year. How many people were there in the workshop? Including Zhangping, Shaoguang, and Bai Yuexia, there were only a few dozen people. Excluding research and development costs and other expenses, the annual salary of an ordinary employee ranged from 100 to 1,000 coins. Zhangping and the others, needless to say, had an annual salary of 10,000 coins. They were filthy rich. What was the concept of Wangguan? It was equivalent to an annual salary of 7 million. The basic salary of Qiguan Rang and the others was barely $1 million. If they included the annual bonuses and rewards, they could barely compete with Zhangping and the others. In the past, he used to feel a little jealous. Unfortunately, this part of the money came from the Lord's private treasury, so Qiguan Rang could not say anything. Looking at it now, it didn't seem like much. If spending money could allow technology to reach the level that the Lord had mentioned, he would be willing to spend his entire fortune on it. He didn't care about money. Instead, he began to feel sorry for the Mo family, which had been suppressed to the point of fragmentation during the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms. Almost all of the Mahist elites died in that generation. They either lost their lineage or lived in seclusion. Jiang Pingji had only managed to recruit a few new members of the Mo family after years of recruitment. If only I could, Qiguan Rang was interrupted by Jiang Pingji before he could finish his sentence. It's impossible in the next few thousand years, let alone in this lifetime. It was useless even if technology advanced, as the entire social structure could not adapt at all. Jiang Pingji told Qiguan Rang about the situation of her era in detail. One person can cultivate such a large area of farmland in Dongqing. Can the people nowadays do that? Qiguan Rang shook his head. He could not imagine how a person could achieve this. It was almost impossible. If you take too big a step, you'll easily injure yourself, Jiang Pingji said. Even with such advanced technology, how many people know how to use it? They learned how to use it, but could they learn how to make it? Even if they learned how to make it, could their thoughts keep up with the changes? Only a long period of time could shape such a world. Even for me, I can only guide people to avoid a few hundred years of detours. The future still depends on the next generation. Pulling a sapling to help it grow is not feasible. I alone cannot contend against the entire era. What I can do is to pave the way and guide the next generation. The heavens are blind. How can they be so unfair to the Lord? Qiguan Rang was silent for a long time after listening. He sighed and said, 100 years is too short. Jiang Pingji smiled. She did not look regretful at all. Looking at Qiguan Rang's reaction, she felt that the background music of Borrow 500 Years from the Heavens should be played to fit the occasion. In her previous life, a small number of people could indeed reach a lifespan of 500 years. Most people's average lifespan was about 250 years. In that case, Zixiao's actions are all in accordance with the Lord's wishes. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, he's helping me. Isn't it cute to be an unknown man behind a successful woman? Qiguan Rang was speechless. After a while, he asked a question that was extremely coquettish. Was Zixiao a woman in his previous life? Jiang Pingji laughed and said, although Zixiao is beautiful, how does his words and actions have the charm of a woman? Qiguan Rang asked hesitantly, will men be so popular in the future? Jiang Pingji was speechless. Wait, what did he mean by, men will be so popular in the future? Did Wenjing define her as a man without even asking? Wenjing, I'm a woman. I was an am. She really did not know what coquettish thoughts these scholars were thinking. Wei Ci suspected that she was a man in her previous life. Qiguan Rang also thought that she was a man. They would not be satisfied until they saw her pull out her crotch that was bigger than theirs, right? Qiguan Rang sucked in a breath of cold air. She did not know what coquettish thoughts he was thinking of. Jiang Pingji did not know that Qiguan Rang had already begun to suspect that the future world was returning from a patriarchal society to a matriarchal society. The evidence was as follows. Look at how hot the Lord is, look at how hot Wei Ci is. Isn't it obvious who is inside and who is outside? No wonder the Lord strongly supports women. It is also for the future. Qiguan Rang waved the fan in his hand. He needed a gust of cold wind to cool down his brain. Originally, he had plans to train his daughter, Qiguan Jinghui. Now that he thought about it, Qiguan Rang felt that he still needed a dozen more daughters. If someone else said these words, Qiguan Rang would only think that they were daydreaming. However, the person who said these words was the Lord, someone whom Qiguan Rang had never doubted. Her various actions in the past also indirectly confirmed the truth of these words. Qiguan Rang naturally believed her. He also looked forward to the world she spoke of. Although he could not see the grand future, he was willing to be a brick to build the cornerstone. It took Qiguan Rang a long time to calm his mind. He asked, "Which aspects does the Lord plan to start from?" Jiang Pingji said, "Roughly 2 points. Only 2 points. Is it too little?" Qiguan Rang strained his ears and listened carefully. Jiang Pingji said, "One is technology, and the other is law. Encouraging invention and creation was a point that must be adhered to in the future." Qiguan Rang expressed that he understood, but why the second point was law? The word law seems simple, but it is actually all-encompassing. Jiang Pingji said seriously, "Wenjing, don't you think that the chaotic times in the past were often related to the collapse of law? The law cannot restrain people from doing what they should do, and it invisibly encourages the expansion of ambition. Because the law is not perfect, loopholes can be exploited. The guilty are therefore not punished as they should be, and the social atmosphere is getting worse. This is a sign that the country will be shaken. I value Wenbin so much because of the law. He is the most suitable candidate." Jiang Pingji and Han Yu didn't plan to start a war right away. Instead, they wanted to test the bottom line step by step. Everyone said that there will be no fish when the water is too clear, but the word law does not tolerate muddy gray areas or dark areas where one cannot see one's fingers. Han Yu assisted Jiang Pingji in formulating the governance plan for Changye, leaving no room for corruption. His style of doing things was evident. He would rather suggest that Jiang Pingji increase everyone's salaries than to deliberately allocate more money for the various levels to take advantage of. Wenbin. Qiguan Rang's eyes darkened. Since ancient times, those who advocated for reform never ended up well, not to mention that Han Yu's revised law would likely harm the interests of many people. "I will protect him, and so will you." Qiguan Rang nodded solemnly. Of course he would. If Han Yu was really shouldering such a heavy responsibility, Qiguan Rang would support him to the end, even if Han Yu was harming his own interests. P.S. Follow the WeChat official account, Limiox is 666. Chapter 1357. No matter what kind of changes Jiang Pingji had brought to this era, such changes needed time to ferment and spread. As time went by, new ideas could slowly replace the old ones that people were used to. It would take decades or even decades for it to break out. At present, the old ways of thinking were still dominant. In people's old ways of thinking, men were in charge of external affairs, making money and socializing, while women were in charge of maintaining the family, taking care of children, and supporting parents. It seemed that the division of labor was clear, but in fact, it limited women's activities and horizons, making the idea that men were superior to women even more deeply rooted. Even the noble ladies of prominent families couldn't live without the inner chamber, their husbands, elders, and children. In addition to these projects, there was also the so-called wife diplomacy. The noble ladies had to help their husbands expand and consolidate their connections in foreign activities. Before the rise of Wanzhou, there were not many ministers under Jiang Pingji's command. Half of them were single people and the Ding clan. After the rise of Wanzhou, the Jinling court recruited a large number of middle-level talents for Jiang Pingji. Most of them were married. When their husbands were sent to fight or manage the local economy, the wives stayed in Wanzhou. As time went by, they also felt a little irritated and gradually began to interact with each other. The size of these wives' bosom circle depended on the status and relationship of their husbands in the officialdom. Their husbands had a good relationship. The wives had a good relationship. If their husbands had a high status, the wives' bosom circle would be larger. Even if they weren't on good terms before, they would still interact more. Eventually, they would become familiar with each other. Before Jiang Pingji attacked Huang Song, the wives had begun to interact with each other. When she returned from the war, all the tea parties were in full bloom. The tea parties were a battlefield for the wives to display their diplomatic skills. They all knew who to build a good relationship with and who to alienate. Han Yu's wife was the noblewoman with the highest status among them. Naturally, she had the best way of winning over the wives. Although she looked down on these poor women and despised them for being vulgar and stupid, she didn't show it on the surface. Her tea parties were also the best and most thoughtful in the circle of the noble ladies in Wanzhou. Which madam wouldn't envy her? Outsiders didn't know that the relationship between her and Han Yu was at its lowest point. Looking at her exquisite and elegant life, they naturally envied the deep love between the husband and wife. Madame Han enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by stars. It made her feel like she had returned to the past. Back when she was in Zhe County, her tea party was also unattended. Madams of low status and humble birth were not even qualified to receive an invitation from her. But now, she had to put up with a group of uncultured women attending her tea party. Not only that, but this group of coarse women who only knew how to drink like a pig also liked to complain about their husbands at tea parties and talk about their sufferings. As Jiang Pingji climbed higher and higher, their bitterness increased. Her husband's career was prosperous, and his status rose. Almost every household had one or two beautiful concubines. Beautiful concubines threatened their status as legal wives, and some of them were pregnant, almost standing on their heads to piss and defecate. All the madams seemed to have found a common topic and chatted endlessly. Madame Han was disgusted. Such a vulgar woman, it was no wonder that her husband disliked her because of her old age. Which man would like such a shameless woman? Last night, that little bitch kept saying that she had a stomachache. It was obvious that she was greedy and ate the wrong food, but she urged others to accuse me of wanting to hurt her child. What was the point of doing that? She was just a concubine who was not worthy to be seen in public. She really thought she was someone important. She said that she did not care, but the handkerchief in her hand was almost broken by her, and her eyes were red. This is not bad. The one who lives in Chang and Lane is really miserable. Another madam sighed and said, her mother-in-law doesn't like her, and her husband doesn't like her either. It seems that they want to help the concubine get promoted and demote her to a concubine and give up her position. She refused, and I heard that she was slapped by her mother-in-law in front of all the servants in the mansion. Her face was swollen. Last night was too noisy, and I am afraid that it has spread. These madams lived a boring life. To relieve their loneliness, tea parties were naturally a good way to kill time. They were all regular customers of tea parties, so they were familiar with each other. They knew who the madam in Chang and Lane was as soon as they heard it. They could not help but sigh and say that she was pitiful. Madame Han Yu was even more annoyed when she heard the gossip. Didn't these stupid women know that one should not wash one's dirty linen in public? They casually talked about the scandals of the inner mansion everywhere. They deserved to be disliked by their husbands. Madame Han was about to drink a cup of tea to calm down when she heard the voice of a strange woman. The woman's voice was not as clear as an oriole's. Instead, it was a little rough and hoarse like a man. How could it be a woman? She said, such a man, it is better to abandon him. The madams who heard the voice looked in the direction of the voice and saw a woman who was dressed very plainly in the corner. Her clothes were not bright either. If she was not sitting in the middle of the table, others would think that she was a wet nurse who served people. How can you say that? The woman said, did I say something wrong? A man who has a change of heart not only spoils his concubine but also lets her do whatever she wants, filling the house with evil. What can such a man do in this life? It is better to abandon him early and find a smart man. The madams blushed when they heard that. Although they complained, they had never thought of divorcing. Besides, that was their husband. It was not the turn of a minor official's wife to criticize them. Someone said, what an impudent shrew. I just saw that this woman's right foot is sick. Another madam who was sitting next to the woman said coldly, one of the 7 diseases of a woman is a bad disease. Madam, instead of talking nonsense here and disturbing the peace of other people's houses, it is better to think of a way to avoid becoming a lowly wife. This was a relatively polite way of saying it. Some people even questioned the woman's identity. She really did not look like a noble lady. Even if she was someone's wife, she would be a minor official. How could a minor official's wife be qualified to attend a tea party of this level? Although Han Yu's wife was a bit pretentious, her memory and ability were still outstanding among the noble ladies. Even if there were more than 100 guests, she could accurately call out their identities and chat warmly with them. She was the one who ordered people to prepare the invitations for the tea party. Naturally, she would not invite an unknown minor official's wife. She looked at the woman carefully, trying to match her with the invitation she had sent out. Madame Han's tea party was the most famous in the circle of noble ladies in Wanzhou. She was also Han Yu's wife. Of course, the womenfolk of Feng Jin and the others couldn't be omitted from the invitation. However, many of the womenfolk declined. The only woman who replied was Lieutenant Dian Yan's wife. Could it be, before Madame Han could speak to smooth things over, Dian Yan's wife was not angry. Instead, she laughed and said clearly, "You don't have to worry about this. There has never been a lowly wife in the family, only a lowly husband. If he does anything disloyal, he will naturally report to the Lord and order a divorce." The madam still wanted to laugh. What lowly husband? What kind of phrase was that? P.S. Follow the official WeChat account. Limioxes 666. Chapter 1358. Most of them snorted, but a few of them found out that the lady addressed Zhang Pingji as Lord. Realizing this, their eyebrows twitched uncontrollably. Those who were qualified to address Zhang Pingji as Lord were naturally her subjects. Women like them could only address her as a Lanting Duchess. What was the background of this woman? Han Yu's wife was even more certain of her guess. Although she was freaking out, she still put on a decent smile and stepped forward to greet them. "I didn't expect Count Lu to be here too. It's my fault for neglecting our distinguished guest." Han Yu's wife had sent invitations to all the other ladies. It was not that she wanted them to come, but she was being considerate. Whether they were willing to attend the tea party or not was completely different from whether they had received the invitation. It was good if they came, but it was fine if they didn't. She had sent the invitation anyway. The lady said frankly, "My wife is not my lord's subject, and this is not an official occasion. My wife can just address me as Shitanyang." As soon as she said this, the faces of the ladies were like a color palette that had been overturned. Not many people knew the name Lu Shitanyang outside of the casualty camp. The ladies wanted to build a circle of friends, so they would naturally investigate the basic information of the other ladies. They all knew that Dian Yan's wife used to be a female battalion commander, but she became a military doctor because of her injury. Even if they didn't think that women could do anything great in the army, many of their husbands were not as powerful as Lu Shitanyang. If they criticized Lu Shitanyang and her husband Dian Yan would make things difficult for their husbands. Thinking of this, their faces became even worse. Their status in the family was precarious, and they were under great family pressure. That was why they liked to find like-minded people at the tea party to vent their stress. If their husbands knew that they had offended someone and caused a disaster, they would probably use this as an excuse to divorce. Han Yu's wife was right to complain. These ladies were not of high birth, which meant that their maternal families were not powerful enough. If they were really divorced by their rich husbands, their maternal families would not be able to support them. Everyone was worried, but Lu Shitanyang didn't feel anything. Or rather, she didn't care about the schemes of the ladies in the inner house. She was one of the first batch of female soldiers in the female battalion. When she entered the battalion, she was less than 15 years old. The female soldiers of the same batch had been sold by their families, but she had signed up for the camp on her own. It was nothing more than to escape the beatings of her vicious stepmother. Her stepmother did not like her and had long wanted to sell her to an old widower in the mountains in exchange for a betrothal gift so that her son could find a wife. Desperate, Fictional took advantage of the night to escape and accidentally ran into the women's camp. In a battle, her right leg was unfortunately disabled, and she had to retire from the women's battalion. Her father, stepmother, and younger brother had been implicated by the Red Lotus group in their early years and had starved to death in a world of ice and snow. She was all alone. Fictional had nowhere to go after her retirement, so she gritted her teeth and transferred to the casualty camp to become an apprentice military doctor. She was a virgin, but she had to deal with the wounds and bodies of different wounded people all day long. At first, it was very embarrassing. Then, out of habit, she felt that no matter how beautiful her body was, it was still like a skinned suckling pig. From a military medical apprentice to a military doctor with exquisite skills in trauma treatment, her position in the military did not retreat but instead advanced. In the end, Yang Si was the matchmaker for her and she married Dian Yen. Dian Yen was a rough but adorable man. She liked him very much. Even if he was the darkest and roughest suckling pig, she would not despise him. Fictional attended the tea party purely because her work in the casualty camp had come to an end and she had 2 days off. She was idle and happened to see the invitation handed over by the gatekeeper. So, she came over to see what a noble lady's tea party looked like. Sitting in the corner and silently eating melons, she was disappointed to find that these noble ladies were no different from the village women she had seen before. Even if they were dressed beautifully, to put it bluntly, they were still a group of women who were worried about losing their husbands' hearts with age. Losing one's husband was like the collapse of heaven and earth. Happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy were all tied to one person. In addition, she did not know that there were so many people who spoiled their concubines and neglected their wives. They could share hardships but not happiness. Once they became rich, they abandoned their wives and children. Could such a man really be impartial when he entered the officialdom? One should know that the legitimate wife and legitimate children represented the orthodoxy. If they did not even follow the orthodoxy of their own family, what else could they be expected to follow? This was also one of the reasons why Fictional was angry. If this kind of practice was not properly rectified, it would become the norm in the future and spread from the top to the bottom. What if the common people followed suit? Now that the Lord was a woman, these people committed crimes against the wind and abandoned their wives. Were they not afraid of being despised by the Lord? Their character was not good, and their brains were stupid. Fictional found an excuse to leave midway. When she left, she was generous and did not hide the disability of her right foot, but no one dared to laugh at her. Dian Yen returned home very late. As soon as he came back, he found his wife frowning and thought that she had been wronged. After a detailed inquiry, he found out the whole story. These people are firecrackers and deliberately want to die without a complete corpse, right? Apart from a few who already had concubines when they went to the Lord, which important official brazenly took a concubine? Even Qiguan Rang and the others had not done it. How dare they do it? Before the world was settled, they spoiled their concubines and neglected their wives. When the world was settled, would they want to take their concubines as wives? Fictional said, this kind of evil practice must not be encouraged. In the long run, I'm afraid it will affect official business. Although for many noble women, concubines were only the wife's mobile byt to reduce the pressure of childbirth and to serve their husbands, for the byt to become the master and for the husband to take his concubine as his wife. This kind of behavior was against the norm. At the same time, it would also mess up the atmosphere and cause a bad influence on society. Women always liked to resent the fish that was stolen, not the cat that stole the fish. If this matter was put in front of the Lord, the cat that stole the fish would probably have a layer of skin peeled off alive. Dian Yen said, "I'll look for military advisor Yang to discuss and let him write a memorial on my behalf." The two families did not live far from each other, so it was easy to visit. But there was a movement in the bedroom that made people blush. Listening carefully, it seemed to be the breathing of a man and a woman intertwining. Hearing the housekeeper's report from outside, the movement gradually subsided, followed by a rustling sound of clothes rubbing against each other. "Why is Dian Yen, that stupid person, here at this time?" Yang Si lowered his voice, full of annoyance. A slightly hoarse female voice came from the bed. The woman said, "Maybe it's business." She yawned, got up, picked up the scattered clothes on the side of the bed and put them on. "Go to sleep, I'll come back after I'm done." "No, I still have things to do in the military camp tomorrow." It was still a cold voice, but with a hint of hoarseness, which was especially irritating to listen to. Yang Si said angrily, "If that stupid Dian Yen doesn't give me an explanation, I'll definitely go to his house and make a scene." Bad people should be struck by lightning when they do something good. He met an unusual woman. Although the two of them were very harmonious in bed, she refused to agree to marry him. He wanted to take advantage of the good atmosphere to coax her into agreeing to the marriage, but he did not expect Dian Yen to jump out and ruin his plans. After Jiang Nongqin heard this, the corners of her lips curled up slightly, and her eyes softened. "I'm leaving." She did not look back. Yang Si was speechless. Chapter 1359. Yang Si was in a bad mood, very bad. Even Dian Yen, who was not good at reading people's words and body language, could see that even though the candles in the room were not very bright, Yang Si looked rather relaxed and lazy, apart from being in a bad mood. Dian Yen coughed softly and carefully organized his words, clearly stating his purpose of coming. The more Yang Si listened, the gloomier his face became, as if dark clouds were gathering and a storm could come at any time. Dian Yen asked anxiously, "What do you think of this matter, military counselor? What else can we do? Of course we'll send people to drag them out. Are we waiting for the Lord to ask about this matter?" Yang Si gritted his teeth and said, "Spoiling the concubine and destroying the wife, disregarding etiquette and law. Do they really think that this is a family matter that outsiders can't interfere with? It's the New Year's banquet in a few days. If we let these people attend, the Lord will be even more unhappy when she thinks of this matter in the future. It's better to deal with it as soon as possible." If the Lord was unhappy, the officials would not even think about having a good New Year. Yang Si had a deep understanding of this point. Dian Yen nodded. There were not as many affairs for military officials as for civil officials, but if the Lord sincerely wanted to torment someone, who cared if they were civil or military officials? This kind of unhealthy practice cannot be encouraged. Dian Yen and his wife, Lv Shitanyang, had the same idea. As the saying went, cultivate one's moral character, govern the country, and bring peace to the world. If one's character was not upright and the family's conduct was crooked, it would be difficult for such a person to be a good person in the officialdom. Yang Si said, "Send someone to find out who they are. First, catch the most violent ones, then write this matter into a memorial and present it to the Lord." The New Year's Eve banquet was in 2 days. Yang Si did not want to see these people at the banquet and spoil his appetite. It was not difficult to investigate these matters. Those madams often communicated at tea parties, so the governance of the family house was naturally not very strict. After spending a day, Yang Si got the first list of names. He looked at it and smiled coldly. If I don't teach you a good lesson, the name Yang Si will be written upside down. In terms of narrow-mindedness and holding grudges, Yang Si could be ranked in the top 3 under Jiang Pingji's command. Last night, Dian Yen ruined his plans. Yang Si could settle the score later, but these people who spoiled the concubine and destroyed the wife had to be skinned. Come, prepare the carriage and horses. When Yang Si arrived, Jiang Pingji was checking the accounts with Su Ku. Fighting a war was a very costly activity. Even if they won a war, they would not be able to recover much. She still had to reward the generals who had rendered meritorious service and reward the soldiers of the 3 armies. If it wasn't for the prosperous industries in the rear, this year's finances would probably be in the red. Even so, she still had to live frugally next year. Xiaoyu, make a budget for next year's expenditure, and give me as soon as possible. If there isn't enough silver in the public treasury, I'll get some from the private treasury. Too much fertile land in Hu County has been burned down. I'm afraid it will affect the price of grain. Send someone to keep a close eye on it. She said a lot of things, and Su Ku listened carefully. If he couldn't remember, he would make a mark with his pen. After talking for an hour, Jiang Pingji felt thirsty. She drank a cup of warm water to moisten her throat. At this moment, she heard Yang Si coming. Jiang, Shi, at Yang, came. Yang, he, Yang, from, Si, Yang, comma, from, Jing, Yang, from. He really didn't know what they were after. Yang Si handed over a booklet with a solemn expression. Jiang Pingji thought that something big had happened. She took the booklet and read it with a solemn expression. What's wrong with these people? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and a look of disgust appeared in her eyes. Spoiling the concubine and neglecting the wife. Disregarding etiquette, spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife, this is the first, Yang Si said. Overstepping the bounds and committing treason, this is the second. Su Ku, who was at the side, could not help but tremble his fingers when he heard this. He deeply wondered which unlucky person had offended Yang Si so badly. Did they not know that Yang Si had the ability to suppress Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang, and that he was the most petty and vengeful among the officials under the Lord's command? Offending Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen was nothing to be afraid of. He might lose his future, but he would still have his life. It would be terrible to offend Yang Si. This guy could torture people to death. The severity of his attacks depended on the degree of offending him. Disregarding etiquette, spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife, overstepping his bounds, treason and heresy. The former could still be mitigated, depending on the severity of the punishment, but the latter was different. In serious cases, it could even implicate the entire family. Jiang Pingji also saw Yang Si's solemnity and asked curiously, the practice of spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife cannot be condoned, but what about overstepping his bounds? Yang Si said, the custom of spoiling his concubine and neglecting his wife cannot be condoned, but what about overstepping his bounds? Yang Si said, which one has made great contributions? How can they receive such a special honor? According to the old system, one could not take in concubines just because they wanted to. It also depended on whether the man was capable and how capable he was. If one dared to take in so many concubines without reaching that status, this was overstepping his bounds and flouting the law. A light punishment would be demotion and losing his official position. A heavy punishment would be the extermination of his family. Yang Si said again, "Please take a look, my lord. The few people at the top have 7 or 8 concubines in their backyards. Only 3 of these women have passed the official rank. The others are still treated as servants, but the servants and maids in the residence treat them as concubines. It can be seen that the master of the residence has tacitly allowed it." Jiang Pingji's gaze slid down again. There were only 4 people on the list at the top, but there were more than 20 at the bottom. Although these people are not as arrogant as the former, they also have 1 wife, 3 concubines, or 4 concubines in the residence. Yang Si noticed her movements and took the initiative to explain. According to ancient etiquette, a minister has 1 wife and 1 concubine, and a commoner has 1 husband and 1 wife. These people come from humble backgrounds or have low family backgrounds. Their achievements in the officialdom are not obvious, and they can be considered to have made no contributions. They are already arrogant before they have made a name for themselves, brazenly taking in 3 or 4 concubines. Their status was not high enough, but they still dared to take in so many concubines. Who gave them the courage? Didn't they know what kind of person they were? Yang Si was a smart person. If he wanted to kill someone, he would certainly not use simple and crude reasons. For many men, taking in wives and concubines was a wonderful thing in life. Even if they reprimanded them righteously and sternly on the surface, they would still secretly envy them. If Yang Si were to start from this point, there was a high chance that he would not be able to kill them. Instead, he would be hated by them and make an enemy out of nothing. Therefore, he liked to raise the banner of justice and orthodoxy high up in order to kill people, making them suffer and unable to fight back. Jiang Pingji nodded and said, "You're right, but I see that there is a person who has made a special mark on it." "What's so special about him?" Yang Si said in disgust, "This person is the most abominable. He connived at his pregnant concubine to move into the main courtyard. He addressed her as madam and took his concubine as his wife. This person's husband is heartless, and his father is heartless. His mother did not think about educating her children and grandchildren and straightening out the family style. Instead, she helped the wicked do evil. According to my investigation, his daughter-in-law did not commit any of the 7 sins. She was filial to her parents-in-law and raised her children. In order to force her daughter-in-law to abdicate and give up her position to a better man, his mother actually slapped her daughter-in-law for 15 minutes in front of the entire residence. She punished her to kneel on a bluestone slab in the rain for a day and a night. Such humiliation is simply unheard of. Yang Si's words were powerful and resonant. Even Su Ku was affected. Although everyone knew that Yang Si was not a nosy person, they still had to give him a call. Chapter 1360. Needless to say, the livestream viewers were cheering for Yang Si so much that they owed him money. Her Highness Xiaoli, are you in a hurry? Xiao Rong looks especially manly today. Even his beard can't hide his charm. Li Jiamiku, yes, a thief. His aura was also strong, second only to his lord's height of 2.8 meters. Han Yan Ningming, I'm going to climb the wall. I used to like Rong Air, but I've fallen in love with her today. They said that today's scene was the most manly Yang Si had appeared on stage in many years. At the same time, there were many in the audience who didn't think so. As far as they knew, there were many men in ancient times who had wives and concubines. What kind of restrictions were there? Those in power were all men. Of course, men would protect men. It was impossible for them to make such rules. When Yuji, I remember there's a saying that goes, farmers who collect 3 to 5 buckets of grain still want to have concubines. Concubines weren't so strict in ancient times, right? Tudu Fecho, the mortality rate in ancient times was so high, and the survival rate of female babies was much lower than that of male babies. How could it be that easy to take a concubine? The concubinage system had always been the privilege of a small number of people with high positions of power. Ordinary people only had the right to do so in the Yuan dynasty. However, it was not without restrictions. Only those who were over 40 years old and had no children could have a concubinage. If this condition was not met, the person who had a concubinage without permission would be whipped 40 times. In ancient times, the ratio of men to women was not balanced. Sometimes, women were even allowed to share wives or pawn wives, completely commercializing and turning women into resources. Under such circumstances, who would dare to allow a commoner to take a concubine without any restrictions? Female resources would be crazily collected by those with high positions of power, and the number of bachelors who were unable to find a wife would increase exponentially. In this way, all kinds of violence and crimes against women would rise steadily, which was not conducive to the stability of the feudal state. It was necessary to set a threshold for concubines. Although there was no guarantee that no one would commit a crime by doing so, the number of people taking concubines was indeed not as exaggerated as imagined. Yang Si held the banner of etiquette in his hands, so he was naturally fearless. Those who were attacked by him would be in a miserable state. No matter how strong a person was, could he be stronger than 1,000 years of accumulated etiquette? Jiang Pingji frowned deeply and asked Yang Si, "Are the people you wrote real?" "It's absolutely true. It's just that." Yang Si said, "For the sake of safety, please send someone to investigate and verify its authenticity." Jiang Pingji sneered. With a flick of her wrist, she slammed the booklet onto the heavy copper table. Yang Si and Su Kuk heard a painful sound. When Jiang Pingji released her grip, there was a handprint that was half a knuckle deep on the table. How dare they? The world had yet to be settled, yet he dared to ignore etiquette and be so rampant. Who can guarantee that the girls around them are all brought in through the proper channels? Jiang Pingji was obviously really angry. Yang Si grinned and watched the show, waiting for those idiots to be unlucky. Unexpectedly, the Lord said, "Jing Rong, I'll leave this matter to you. Any madman who spoils his concubine but neglects his wife or oversteps his authority will be suspended and investigated." Yang Si, No, it was almost the new year. Why would he be assigned an additional task at this time? Yang Si couldn't hold back his urge to complain in his heart, but he put on a serious face and said, "Suspending him from duty for investigation at this time is too. I've lost a few scoundrels who don't know the rules of etiquette. Can't I maintain my composure? Won't I be a joke to the world if I'm held back by them?" Jiang Pingji sneered and said, "If you say that they will be suspended from duty for investigation, then they will be suspended from duty for investigation. Take back all the invitations to the New Year's banquet this year. Let them stay at home and reflect on what they've done wrong. Many ambitious people want to enter officialdom but don't have a chance. They don't care. Pack up and get lost." The first few sentences were still decent, but the latter words directly exposed his true nature. It was the standard style of a bandit. Yang Si was happy and depressed at the same time. He was happy because his lord was a real man. She didn't hesitate to suspend more than 30 middle-level people in one go. He was depressed because his lord exploited people. She was already busy at the end of the year. With more than 30 people gone, the pressure on the others would be heavier. He complained endlessly in his heart, but he still had to solemnly accept the order on the surface. Jiang Pingji suddenly said, "By the way, you just said that the man's father was heartless. What's going on?" Yang Si said, "It said that the eldest son encountered a quack when he was young. A serious illness caused him to lose the ability to carry on the family line. This person was particularly disgusted with his eldest son. He often beat and scolded him to vent his anger. According to the old servant, he even slapped the child so hard that he lost his hearing in his right ear. The audience exploded when they heard this. Salami Gigi, damn, this man is really a scumbag. Spoiling his concubine and destroying his wife, supporting a mistress, letting the mistress live in the wife's house, domestic violence against the wife, beating the son deaf, the mother-in-law beating the daughter-in-law, spoiling the mistress. Even the scriptwriters of modern dramas wouldn't dare to write such a story. Damiazang, in ancient times, concubines were legal. I agree with everything else, but the mistress is too much. Beisheng Xianggao, ha ha ha, didn't you hear what Rong said just now? That man doesn't have the right to have a concubine, right? If he doesn't have the right to have a concubine, then this concubine isn't legitimate. If she isn't a mistress, then what is she? A scumbag man and a scumbag woman. The legal wife and son are really unlucky. Chifeng Liao, and the evil mother-in-law. Turu Feiqiu, hold your breath. Based on my 10 years of experience following updates, I have a feeling that the streamer is about to make a big move. Jiang Pingji lifted her eyelids and said coldly, how can such a beast father be a father? Personally beating the ears of one's son was a beast. Nowadays, there was a saying that, a filial son is born under the rod, but no one dared to beat someone to death or cripple them, except for those who were extreme and ignorant. Of course, if the feudal society developed for another few hundred years, perhaps parents would be innocent of beating their children to death. Yang Si lamented, what a pair of poor children. Dongqing has experienced several wars. Millions of people and soldiers have lost their lives. Jiang Pingji glanced at Yang Si and Su Ku and said calmly, at this time, we should encourage childbirth and restore the population as soon as possible. In other words, children are the future of the entire country. They should be treated well. How can they be defiled by these beasts? Jing Rong, call Wenbin over. I have something to discuss with him. Although Jiang Pingji did not finish speaking, Yang Si felt that his lord was about to make a big move. Yes. Yang Si and Su Ku vaguely guessed something, but the audience in the streaming room understood immediately. The streamer wanted to deprive the father and mother of their guardianship. Although there was no such thing as guardianship in ancient times. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, streamer, you're courting death. Jiang Pingji's eyes were calm. Even though the streaming room was in an uproar, she was still calm and collected. Streamer V, it's not as difficult as you think. To parents, besides continuing the bloodline, carrying on the family line, and raising them for old age, children are also the parents' tacit private property. Since it's private property, naturally there are ways to make them spit it out. In this era, the emperor had great power, especially the founding emperor. Jiang Pingji was tacitly the future emperor, so she had the right to be willful. In addition, she did not intend to succeed in one go. Naturally, she had to test the bottom line of everyone repeatedly. I have to let them know who has the final say in this land. Jiang Pingji smiled and poured the water in the cup out. Not a single drop was left. She sprinkled it into the trash can in the corner of the courtyard. Chapter 1361. What was Han Yu doing at the moment? He was checking the homework of his eldest son, Han Run, and his concubine's daughter. The two sons were calm, but the concubine's face was pale. Han Yu wasn't a strict father, but he wasn't a compassionate one either. He was a very normal patriarch of a feudal family. He had a lot of communication with his sons. His daughter was raised in the boudoir. They rarely saw each other except during festivals, not to mention checking his daughter's homework. His eldest son, Han Run, had talent and was willing to work hard. Even the picky Han Yu was very satisfied. But the concubine's son and daughter were different. The concubine's son was mediocre and playful, and the concubine's daughter couldn't even speak fluently. The concubine's daughter saw that her father was frowning. She was so scared that tears came out of her eyes and her body was trembling. She was weak, pitiful, and helpless. Han Run said, "Father, she is a little nervous. Don't scare her." Han Run didn't communicate much with his siblings, and the three of them didn't have a deep sibling relationship. It was just that the environment of the academy was relatively closed and simple. It was isolated from the disputes of the outside world, and the estrangement between the official and the concubine was also weakened. Han Run saw that his sister was so timid and nervous in front of their father. He felt a trace of sympathy and took the initiative to put in a good word for her. Han Yu's expression softened a little when he heard that. He said to his daughter, "Let's call it a day. We'll check tomorrow. Go back and get ready." The concubine's daughter nodded helplessly. "It's unreasonable to let girls study in the academy. Father is so strict with my sister." He had taught her for years, but he still couldn't satisfy his father with those questions, not to mention his sister who had only studied for a year. The three left the main hall. The concubine's brother was a few steps behind Han Run, and the concubine's daughter was behind them. Han Run said calmly, "Half of the students in the academy are girls. Tell them that." The concubine's brother's face turned red. He dared to say it. If he dared to say it, others would dare to beat him to death. "I don't dare to say it." The concubine's brother complained, "Are the girls in the academy still girls?" In his opinion, girls should be as docile as the maids in the mansion and speak softly. Who would have thought? Han Run frowned. "You were in the wrong first." Fortunately, father was busy and didn't ask about it. Otherwise, the concubine-born brother hurriedly begged for mercy, "Little brother's good brother, please don't say any more. The walls might have ears." Han Run sighed. The matter he was referring to was the incident of his brother out of wedlock. He didn't know the severity of the situation and had verbally harassed a girl. As a result, the other party had grabbed him by the collar and held him down in the corridor for a beating. This had attracted the attention of many students. If it weren't for the girl's sense of propriety, her brother's hand would have been twisted and fractured. This matter was brought to the attention of the headmaster, and his brother was reprimanded by a few headmasters. His words were frivolous towards his classmate, completely lacking the demeanor of a gentleman. Not only did the headmaster not support his brother, but he punished him to clean the classroom after school for a month. "Are you scared now?" Han Run asked. "Didn't your classmates warn you not to mess with the girls?" All the senior male students in the Golden Scale Academy knew that none of the girls in the female class could be provoked. They looked normal on the outside, but they were terrifyingly strong. The upperclassmen girls could easily subdue several adult men. The lethality of this attack was truly terrifying. Not only the other girls, but Han Run also noticed that his sister, who had been studying in the academy for a year, was also extraordinarily strong. He didn't know that this was due to the body refining technique that the girls in the female class had learned. The body refining technique that the female class of the Golden Scale Academy had learned came from the female camp, and the body refining technique of the female camp was a summary of the scientists in Jiang Pingji's world. It was a training method specifically for the physical fitness of women. This method could stimulate the potential of the female body to a great extent and temper the muscles and bones of the whole body. Even if it couldn't reach Jiang Pingji's level, the overall combat power would still be good. Strengthening the body and combat power were secondary. The key was that it could optimize the female body to a great extent. For example, menstruation would not hurt, and the pain and risk of childbirth would also plummet. These 2 points were the real benefits for women in this era. These were the short-term benefits. The long-term benefit was that the body refining technique could accelerate the positive evolution of genes. The first or second generation did not have any effect, but after 10 or 20 generations, the effect was obvious. Han Run still didn't know that his seemingly weak and quiet daughter had been unknowingly led astray by others. "Master, there is a carriage from the governor's manor outside. Is it a summon from the Lord?" Han Yu couldn't help but be nervous. "I don't know what it is." "Hurry up and get ready." He didn't even warm the chair when he came back. He hurriedly put on a thick coat to keep him warm. It was covered with silver outside, and snowflakes were floating in the air. "May I know why the Lord summoned me so urgently?" Jiang Pingji said, "I need Jing Rong to tell you about it." Jing Rong. What trouble did Yang Si cause him this time? Han Yu looked at Yang Si and found that Yang Si was looking at him with a look that said, "Don't blame me, I have no choice." Han Yu fell into a suspicious silence. Yang Si must be up to something. As expected, Han Yu really wanted to rush forward and strangle Yang Si to death after knowing the whole story. No matter what kind of grudge you have, can't you wait until after the new year to take revenge? Favoring a concubine and neglecting a wife would only affect your character and career. Overstepping his bounds, was he trying to kill the 3 human races? Jiang Pingji didn't seem to see Han Yu's angry eyes. She said to him seriously, "Wenbin, what do you think we should do about this?" Han Yu said, "Dismiss them from office, of course. No matter how the crime came about, those cannon fodder could only admit it." Jiang Pingji was very dissatisfied. Why did these people dare to overstep the bounds? Isn't it because the law has collapsed and no one can restrain them? With that, Han Yu understood that the Lord wanted to revise this part of the law. No wonder she asked him to come here. Unfortunately, Han Yu was only half right. Jiang Pingji said again, "Jing Rong also told me about the family in Cheng and Ali. Wenbin, don't you think the father is guilty?" Han Yu was about to speak, but he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated and swallowed his words, showing a thoughtful expression. If the Lord only wanted to revise the law, she could have just sent someone to pass the message. There was no need to send a carriage to pick him up. Unless, the Lord's real purpose was not this, but something more difficult and urgent. Han Yu asked tentatively, "My lord, do you mean, to convict this person and punish him for several crimes?" It was a bit tricky to convict a father for deafening his son. After all, there was no such law at present. Jiang Pingji asked in reply, "Why? You don't think he should be convicted?" Han Yu said honestly, "It's hard to make a conclusion. It's not easy to convict him. If the father hurt his son and put him in jail, the innocent child would also be accused of being unfilial. Although this logic seemed to have been eaten by dogs, it was common practice." Chapter 1362. "I don't agree with it either, but..." Han Yu said helplessly, "He is the biological father after all. According to the current filial piety, there would be no child without a father. Not to mention deafening the child's ears, even if the father took the child's life back, he would at most be punished by the authorities. And this was a relatively older child. If the infant was still in swaddling clothes, he would be innocent even if he was strangled to death by his parents." Han Yu was a smart man. He could vaguely guess his lord's intention. He didn't oppose it, but he was worried that his lord would be opposed by the whole world. There are 2 kinds of kindness that parents owe to their children. One is to give birth to them, and the other is to raise them. If the kindness of giving birth is weighed, the mother owes him 10 months of pregnancy, but the father owes him only 1 night of pleasure. Doesn't he know which one is more important? It would be fine if he treated the child well, but he beat, scolded, and humiliated him. Although he is the son of the first wife, his life is worse than that of a servant. The child lost the ability to carry on the family line because of illness. In the final analysis, it is the father's fault. Now he has the cheek to despise the child. What wrong did the child do? Doesn't he have a conscience? Jiang Pingji's words were almost a challenge to the whole society's filial piety. If it were any other audience, they would have jumped in anger. Han Yu and Yang Si were both rational people. Although they were a little embarrassed, they had to admit that what their lord said made sense. After all, she was their lord. What do you mean, my lord? This child was born in a good family. His father was also a well-educated man, but he ended up like this. Jiang Pingji said, if this is the case for him, will the other children be in a worse situation? The father made his son deaf. Will the parents who are worse off break the children's hands and feet or beat them to death? Will they ignore the ethics of blood relations and bully or rape the children? Han Yu and Yang Si could still listen to the first few sentences calmly, but the last sentence scared them. They didn't know what killing intent was, but they really had the illusion that the air was frozen into ice just now. Han Yu said, parents and children are blood relatives. It is possible to injure or disable them, but ignoring the ethics of blood relations. Jiang Pingji said, Wenbin, you can ask Jing Rong. Is this really not true? Yang Si's reaction was different from Han Yu's. The former was shocked and deeply disgusted. Han Yu looked at Yang Si, his eyes full of hope and desire for confirmation. He was a man in the right, and his education had been positive. Even after experiencing the flames of war, this essence did not change much. It was just like how a person who lived under the sun would not know what was hidden in the darkness. Yang Si looked back at Han Yu and nodded after a while. Although it is appalling, this kind of thing is not uncommon. In ancient times, transportation and communication were very backward. The furthest many people traveled in their lives was to marry into neighboring villages and work in neighboring towns to earn money. Their living environment was relatively closed, and the ethics and morals in their minds might not be able to restrain them. Being simple did not mean that they were not stupid. Bullying one's own children wasn't a lot, but it wasn't a small number either. If he could kill his own child, wouldn't it be even more dangerous for the other children in the village? Not to mention this era, even in the era of the Livestream viewers, there were many cases of men in isolated villages impregnating left-behind children or taking the opportunity to violate them. Even old men in their 70s or 80s would do such a thing, let alone an adult man full of vigor and vitality. Jiang Pingji's behavior was acknowledged by all the salted fish. They couldn't wait to shout their support in her ear. Gue kai guo fengxiu, sigh, although I know that the streamer is courting death, I still hope that she can succeed. Qian Zui Bebe, protection of minors, the streamer must resist the pressure. Nwani, that. If I say the opposite, will you guys beat me to death? I think it's good that the streamer wants to protect underage children, but she must be more comprehensive. Don't turn it into a law to protect minors. Chu Jiren Zhongsan, yes, it hurts me to talk about it. Naughty children throw babies off tall buildings, naughty children kill babies, naughty children carry little girls into the elevator, causing little girls to fall to their death from the 18th floor, throwing objects from high above and killing people. Swazwazhua, the one above, said it very well. You should pay attention to this point. Even if they are underage, they still have to be responsible for their own actions. Thinking of those naughty children on the news who escaped punishment because of their age, I really want to hack those naughty parents to death. Mo Lanji, in ancient times, wasn't it the father's fault for not teaching his children properly? If a child kills someone, either the child is punished or the parents are punished. Maybe it was a sore spot, all the salted fish in the live stream came back to life. Who didn't have naughty children around them? They were full of resentment. Even if they couldn't see naughty children being punished in this world, it was good to watch other worlds. They were worried that Jiang Pingji wouldn't take it seriously, so they hurriedly searched for all kinds of crimes committed by naughty children that killed people. The screen was full of negative emotions. In fact, what the salted fish viewers were worried about would never happen. Jiang Pingji was a person from the future. The salted fish played the role of diligent porters. On the other side, Han Yu's face turned pale when he heard Yang Xi's words. If a father could beat his deaf son by saying that he was grateful to him, then how could he get away with the crime of violating his own blood children? This kind of animal must be punished severely. The law is the bottom line of morality. Jiang Pingji said, Wenbin, you have to know that every word you write now and in the future needs a lot of examples to prove its rationality, whether it's revising the laws of the predecessors or making laws that have never been written before. Just because you don't know things doesn't mean they don't exist. Just because there are no laws written before doesn't mean that this kind of animal is not guilty. I called you here today because I want to entrust this important task to you. I have nothing else to say. You just need to remember one thing, go ahead and do it. No one will dare to stop you. She would kill anyone who dared to stop her. Han Yu bowed solemnly. Yes, Wenbin. If Wei Ci were here, he would find that Han Yu was more and more like the Han Yu in his memory. It was the 12th month of the year. For 11 months, Han Yu was out and about, collecting countless case materials and evidence, and revising the draft repeatedly. Yang Xi watched from the side. He had a vague premonition. His lord didn't do this on a whim. She must have planned it for a long time. His revenge against those people became a sharp blade in his lord's hand and an excuse to take advantage of the opportunity to make trouble. As he was thinking, his lord looked at him. Jing Rong. Yang Xi quickly got up from the table and bowed solemnly. My lord, please give me your orders. Jiang Pingji said, you help Wenbin with this matter first. If you do well, I won't hold you accountable. Yang Xi used her to take revenge, and she used Yang Xi to take advantage of the opportunity to make trouble. This was called reciprocity. Yang Xi's face was bitter. He swallowed the acid that welled up in his throat and said bitterly, yes. Jiang Pingji said, if you do well, I will allow you to prepare a betrothal gift and propose marriage. Han Yu was dumbfounded. What the hell? My lord and Yang Xi, they. Chapter 1363. Yang Xi was happy, but Han Yu had a lot on his mind. Wenbin, no matter how much you hate Xi, you don't have to look like you are grieving. What bad luck. Yang Xi's good mood was ruined by Han Yu's cold stare, but he was too guilty to confront Han Yu. Wasn't it because of Yang Xi that Han Yu had been given so much work? Staring straight at Yang Xi, Han Yu's eyebrows were knitted together so tightly that they could squash a fly. Just now, the Lord said, that you are allowed to prepare betrothal gifts and propose marriage. His ink-black eyes were filled with dissatisfaction, and there was even a hint of disgust, which made Yang Xi's heart burn. So what? Yang Xi asked gloomily, you are allowed to have a son and a daughter, but you are not allowed to find a girl. Han Yu sneered, virtue does not match the position. What the hell? What does it have to do with virtue does not match the position? Yang Xi was still immersed in the shock, but Han Yu had already turned around and left. Yang Xi was so angry that he ran a few steps to catch up. They were good friends who loved each other and fought each other. It was fine that Han Yu didn't give his blessings and gifts, but he even scolded him for virtue does not match the position. He was so angry that he flipped the table. For all, Yang Xi was about to rush up and ask, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. No. Did Han Wenbin misunderstand something? Yang Xi recalled Jiang Pingji's words and instantly realized that Han Yu had misunderstood. He slapped his forehead in annoyance. He tried to catch up and said with a bitter smile, Wenbin, wait a minute. You misunderstood. Hanyu stopped and turned to look at him. What misunderstanding? It is true that I proposed marriage to the Lord, but it is not the Lord. Young Si spread out his hands and said gloomily, the Lord has a lover, and that lover is your junior. Zixiao is a very jealous person. If this misunderstanding spreads to his ears, will Si still be able to live? Han Yu was speechless. Young Si continued, the proposal is to marry Captain Jiang, and the Lord treats her like a sister. If it is a marriage proposal, the Lord will have to be involved. Captain Jiang. Han Yu raised his eyebrows, you have a good eye. This was not a compliment. Every word was filled with mockery. Jiang Nongqin was the #1 heroine in the Lord's camp. Many people had their eyes on this fat piece of meat, but Yang Si had taken it. Han Yu felt sorry for Jiang Nongqin. Why did she choose Yang Si, the unreliable guy? Yang Si pretended not to understand. He cheekily replied with a smile, of course I have good taste. Han Yu was annoyed. Young Si came back to his senses and asked, why are you so indignant that Si has something to do with the Lord, but you don't have any reaction if it's Zixiao? Han Yu said, let's not talk about anything else. Zixiao is a gentleman. Are you? Young Si was speechless after hearing this. I used to be young and ignorant, but now I'm a prodigal son. A prodigal son who has turned over a new leaf is more valuable than gold. Young Si tried to regain some ground, but Han Yu only responded with a sneer. Young and insensible. A prodigal who repents is more valuable than gold. Hee hee, how shameless. Han Yu coldly expressed his contempt. Young Si could only cover his face in despair. Did he really have to work with Han Yu, the hypocrite, for a year? If so, Young Si was not sure if he would die of exhaustion or from anger. Han Yu's mouth was too irritating. Wenbin. About the things that the Lord has assigned to you, what are your plans? Young Si decisively chose to change the topic. He would have a heart attack if he continued to be entangled in this topic. Han Yu frowned and said awkwardly, it's not difficult to collect files, investigate privately, and make new laws. What's difficult is how to make the people accept the new laws. If the people openly attack, the Lord's reputation will inevitably be damaged. I'm also afraid that other gentry families will oppose it. Jiang Pingji's legislation to protect children had, to some extent, damaged the feudal parents' right to dispose of private property. Filial piety was prevalent. Feudal parents naturally hoped that their children could obey them unconditionally. If it was illegal to beat and scold children, those parents would be furious. They gave their children their lives, gave them food, and raised them up. Why couldn't they control everything about their children? That was what parents thought nowadays. Therefore, if they really wanted to legislate, every detail had to be taken into account. They had to clearly distinguish between educating children and maliciously beating them. Young Si said, I think of someone who can help us with this matter. Han Yu asked, who? Young Si said, the Lord's lover. The two of them visited Wei Si together. Wei Si was busy. He was handling 2 documents with a pen in each hand. His work efficiency was like a cheat. Young Si knocked on the table and called, Zixiao, I have something to ask of you. Wei Si stopped writing and looked at Young Si. What's the matter? Han Yu stepped forward and said, Jing Rong said that you can help me with the matter. Wei Si looked serious. He put the 2 bamboo slips aside to dry and stood up to greet the 2. If there's anything, Wenbin can send someone to inform me. You don't have to come in person. Han Yu sighed and explained the cause and effect. Wei Xi's expression also became serious. I came today to ask Zixiao if there's any way to protect the Lord's reputation. It's not difficult. Wei Xi thought for a while and said, the people's obedience is the mandate of heaven. It doesn't matter if the aristocrats oppose it, as long as the people agree. As long as the people agree, there won't be much resistance to the Lord's new law. This matter can be handed over to CI. Wei Xi was the best at manipulating public opinion. Han Yu asked, what are you going to do? Wei Xi smiled, the people are tired of hearing the stories of praises and romance. They'll change their taste after the new year. Yang Xi shivered and asked, wait. Are you going to let the novelists write those stories? Wei Xi said, why not? Novels are 70% true and 30% false. Although there are some exaggerated parts, the overall situation is still based on reality. If you let the novelists write novels and put them on the streets and alleys, the people will be resentful and hate them. When their emotions reach the peak, Wenbin will put out the prototype of the new law. The people will only cheer and sing praises of the Lord's benevolence and love. Even if there are people who oppose it, I'm afraid that the people will tear them to pieces. It's a good thing to legislate to protect children. What are the intentions of those who oppose it? The people were all illiterate and couldn't read a word. People hated them when they were ignorant, but they warmed people's hearts when they were simple. Their emotions were the easiest to manipulate and use. Of course, the people wouldn't know whose interests the new law would hurt. They would only see the poor and innocent children being hurt. Not only would the people not oppose the new law, but they would also support the new law with a sense of justice. Yang Xi and Han Yu trembled secretly. This manipulation of public opinion to play with people's hearts was really good. Han Yu frowned and said, in this case, aren't you worried that it will have the opposite effect? The explosion of negative emotions would have a negative impact. Chapter 1364. In the blink of an eye, it was New Year's Eve. Jiang Pingji held a New Year's banquet as usual and invited the officials to celebrate the New Year together. Huang Song attended as a special guest. Although he was no longer qualified to sit on equal footing with Jiang Pingji, his seat was second only to her. Can't sit still anymore. Huang Song did not bring his two legitimate sons to the New Year's banquet. Instead, he brought his daughter. When the daughter saw a few children of the same age, she immediately could not sit still, but she did not dare to leave without her father's permission. Lady Qi said awkwardly, on such an occasion. What if something happens? Usually, it was not a big deal to quarrel, but now it was Jiang Pingji's New Year's banquet. It would not be good if the child accidentally got into trouble. Huang Song was about to speak when Jiang Pingji said, is that Bogeo's daughter? Yes, it is. Let her come forward. Let me take a look. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. She's pretty and cute. Huang Song caressed his daughter's back and pushed her gently, encouraging her to find Jiang Pingji. The little girl was a little afraid of strangers. Her chubby little face looked left and right. Finally, she walked timidly toward Jiang Pingji. When she got closer, she awkwardly saluted. I wish you a happy and healthy new year. Not only did her childish voice make Jiang Pingji feel cute, but it also made the 850,000 people in the streaming room ko-ed happy and healthy new year. Jiang Pingji reached out and lifted her onto her lap. She asked, did you come with your father? The little girl nodded. Yes, father is over there. Jiang Pingji smiled and grabbed a brocade pouch with a red seal for the new year and hung it on the little girl's waist. I saw that you couldn't sit still just now. Do you want to play with your brother and sister? The little girl bit her lip awkwardly, as if she was thinking about how to answer. In the end, she obeyed her heart and nodded heavily. Then go. Come back when you're hungry. Jiang Pingji smiled softly and instructed Chongqing and a few older children to play with the little girl. Huang Song was completely relieved when he saw that. The New Year's banquet program was refreshed every year, and the dishes were more and more varied. Even an old glutton like Yang Si could not find fault with it. If someone paid attention, they would find that this year, Yang Si was finally not alone. Jiang Nongqin, who was at the side, was wearing a new set of brightly colored clothes. Even though she had a cold face, she looked gentler than usual. While eating, Yang Si noticed that Jiang Nongqin's gaze was on him. What happened? Jiang Nongqin's face was cold. She looked at a dish that had not been touched and raised her chin slightly. Seeing this, Yang Si immediately brought the dish to her side. Because they were eating separately, although there were many dishes on the table, the amount of food on each plate was not large. She had already finished her portion. You seem to be very fond of spicy food these days. Yang Si asked casually, I remember you didn't like it very much before. Jiang Nongqin said, I've liked it recently. Yang Si said, if you still like it, I'll get the maidservant to bring another plate. It's just that this thing tastes sour and spicy. If you eat too much of it, it'll affect your sense of taste. He was a particular person. After tasting food with a strong taste, he would always drink a mouthful of clear soup to disperse the taste in his mouth. Otherwise, the taste of the previous dish would overwhelm the taste of the next dish, and it would not be satisfying. Jiang Nongqin nodded. Jiang Pingji noticed their movements and clicked her tongue softly. She sent someone to send a stack of things to Yang Si. Thank you for the food, my lord. Yang Si smiled. After opening it, the smile on his face slowly froze. Red dates, peanuts, longans, and lotus seeds. The plate contained these 4 items. It was not the delicacies that Yang Si had imagined. Why did his lord send him this? Yang Si raised his head and glanced at his lord. She rolled her eyes at him. He was not a slow-witted person. He came back to his senses as soon as he thought about it. He was so excited that he almost knocked over the food table. At this New Year's banquet, some people were so happy that they wanted to go in circles, while others were anxious and fearful. Whether they were valued by the Lord or not, they would know if they received an invitation to the New Year's banquet. Those who did not receive an invitation would work harder and strive to improve in the coming year. Those who received the invitation were naturally complacent and looked forward to their official careers in the coming year. The most embarrassing thing was that they received the invitation and then had it taken back. They had lost a lot of face. They secretly inquired about it and found that there was more than one family facing such a predicament. However, what exactly did they do wrong? Why did they suddenly take back the invitation to the New Year's banquet? This was undoubtedly a sign that they had been abandoned by the Lord. All the families were not even in the mood to celebrate the new year. They looked for ways to find out the truth. There was no lively laughter in the mansion. There was only a solemn and uneasy atmosphere. In a house in Chang an alley, you are a widower who has ruined your husband. Why are you crying? My son's good official career is going to be washed away by your tears. The old woman in bright clothes was so angry that she raised her eyebrows. She looked at her daughter-in-law with daggers in her eyes, as if she wanted to kill her. Her daughter-in-law's left cheek was swollen. The thick makeup on her face could not hide her embarrassment and haggard appearance. Her hair was loose and yellow. She looked more than 10 years older than her actual age. After being yelled at by the old woman, her eyes, which were swollen from crying, stopped crying in fear. However, she felt even more wronged and sad. The old woman said, I said that your horoscope will ruin your husband and son. It is not good for my son's official career. Look, isn't it true? It will ruin my grandson's deafness and ruin my son's official career. Tomorrow, you will leave the court. If you continue like this, won't my son be ruined by you? You are a jinx. The old woman's expression was fierce, and a trace of murderous intent flashed in her eyes. If this daughter-in-law was still not tactful, then she could not be blamed for being cruel. As a mother, she could not allow a widower who had ruined her husband and son to continue occupying the position of her son's official wife. After the old woman finished speaking, a delicate woman with a protruding belly patted the back of the old woman's hand and comforted her softly. The woman was the old woman's niece, and she was also the old woman's favorite daughter-in-law candidate. Her appearance was good for her husband and son, and her horoscope was also excellent. Ever since her son had accepted her, his official career had been smooth. Her niece's belly also worked hard, and she soon became pregnant. Seeing this, the old woman was even more eager to force her daughter-in-law to abdicate and make room for her niece. The chaotic night passed quickly. On the morning of the first day of the new year, a piece of news blew up the peaceful Wanzhou. The old woman was so scared that her face turned pale and she knelt on the ground with a thud. Even though she was a woman, she knew how big a label it was to disregard the law and overstep the rules. Not only could it crush one person to death, but it could also crush 3 clans to death. When did you make such a grave mistake that you have to exterminate your entire family? The old woman looked at her son in despair, but her son did not respond. At that moment, the unlucky daughter-in-law came over to help her up, and the old woman's anger suddenly found an outlet to vent. She raised her fan-like palm and slapped her daughter-in-law with all her strength. She cried and scolded, "You're a widower who has ruined her husband. Where did this demon come from? We have no enmity, so why did you stay in our house and harm people?" If it was any other time, her son would have pretended not to see it. He did not like his wife either. She was old, ugly, and didn't know how to flatter others. But now, he was so annoyed that he raised his hand to stop his mother's violence. He said awkwardly, "Disregard the law because you spoil your concubine and destroy your wife. Overstep the rules because you have a concubine." Although her family was considered wealthy, they did not have the right to have 5, 6, or 7 or 8 concubines. The old woman used to despise her daughter-in-law and was afraid that she would hold on to her son's heart. So, she bought a few decent-looking concubines and sent them to her son's room to serve him. In the end, she had really shot herself in the foot. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.